look at you. Oh. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. All these notes on the screen. I just lost my notes. Can you can turn them back?
I think somebody has to mute. There is some background music coming.
Okay, we're good to go now. Oh, my video. Hold on. Start video. Okay. Oh, she's back. You can tell. Okay. All good? Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order for October 26, 2020. Am I muted? I think I'm mute.
No.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order for October 26, 2020. I'd like to start this meeting and all future meetings of this board by recognizing that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the City of Ottawa. I want to thank the community for bringing the absence of this acknowledgement to our attention. The relationship with our Indigenous partners is invaluable to our board and our service, and we recognize this should have happened sooner. It did spark a larger discussion on our commitment to reconciliation, and I will be asking the board to consider a motion later in this meeting on that matter. We are currently broadcasting on Zoom and live streaming on YouTube. Given this meeting is being held electronically, I want to caution that there is a possibility of technical difficulties. Should we receive any disruptions, I'd like to ask that everyone remain patient as we work to fix the issue and resume the meeting as soon as possible. In terms of meeting decorum, as each item is presented, I'll ask the board members if the item is received or carried. If you're joining without video, please say your name before speaking. If you're joining the meeting from a location with background noise, please keep yourself muted until it's your time to speak. I'd also like to remind everyone to mute their notifications and alerts to avoid any disruptions to the meeting. Following the public meeting, we will have our in-camera meeting. I want to take a moment to address the events of last week. The verdict issued last week in the trial of Constable Daniel Monsian has added to an already strained relationship between the community and the Ottawa Police Service. We recognize that the journey did not end last Tuesday, and I want to take this opportunity to reiterate that the Ottawa Police Services Board is determined to see real and significant change in accordance with the community's wishes. And although it's frustrating for many of you, this change will take some time. The functions and systems of the Ottawa Police Service are deeply ingrained, and the community as a whole and our partners need to be involved in finding the right path forward. I am asking the public to understand that their message has been heard loud and clear, and we will make our absolute best efforts to reform the service in a meaningful and lasting way. This board, the service, and the community must collaborate in order to ensure we achieve the best outcomes for our city. The Police Services Board continues to hear concerns from the public about police response and de-escalation. As a step toward addressing these concerns, Vice Chair Smallwood and I will be moving a motion later today pertaining to use of force. Chief, I know you are just 2 days shy of your first anniversary with the Ottawa Police Service. So on behalf of the board, I want to once again extend our ongoing support and confidence in the work you are doing to lead our police service through this ongoing period of change. A lot has happened in the past 363 days, and a lot more is still to come. So thank you for your ongoing and unwavering commitment to our service and to this community. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome Councillor Ralston King to the Ottawa Police Services Board. Councillor King will be instrumental in helping us move our agenda forward. His experience with the Ottawa Police Community Equity Council and his role as Council's liaison for anti-racism and ethnocultural relations will bring a unique experience to our board and will help us navigate a path forward. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Mayor Watson for filling in on this board over the past year. This ends my remarks. Do any board members have any questions or comments?
Dan, Sandy, I'd just like to join you in congratulating Peter on successfully completing his first 363 days of serving the citizens of the city of Ottawa. So well done, Peter, and looking forward to the next 364 quiet days.
Thank you. Anyone else? If anyone has their hand up, I'm not seeing it. No? Okay, so can we receive my report? Received?
Received.
Thank you. Okay, confirmation of the agenda. As I previously alluded to my opening remarks, I'll be looking to add 2 items to the agenda tonight. One is a motion for consideration by the board on reconciliation, and the other is a motion for consideration by the board on use of force. So I will move that the Ottawa Police Services Board confirm the amended agenda of October 26, 2020. Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, confirmation of minutes 27 of September 28th, 2020. Are the minutes carried?
Carried.
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 Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Nope.
No? Okay, thank you. Public delegations. We have one public delegation registered to speak this evening. We'll hold this delegation until we complete the consent agenda, and then that will be the first order of business. Inquiries. Are there any inquiries from the board members?
Yes.
Member Nerman.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Dean. And Chief Slowly, I also take this opportunity and sometimes feel proud that I was a member of the committee. We decided to appoint you as the new chief. I'm really thrilled. Community feedback which I am getting and from the members, we are all looking forward to the further changes and looking forward to be working with you more closely in the coming years. So Chief, I have 2 inquiries, and in case you do not have the immediate response, I am fine with that. That can be responded at a later date. First, let me extend my sympathies to the Abdi family and the community would continue to grieve the tragic loss of a loved one. And let me also acknowledge how difficult this process must have been for Constable Monstian and his family, and I hope they are also well. I also want to acknowledge the civilian and the sworn members of our Ottawa Police Service, who despite the challenges will surely continue to face, will I know, continue to serve our community with pride and professionalism. In the aftermath of the court decision, it is critical that we do not lose sight of the importance of introspection and what we can learn from this tragedy to improve policing services for the benefit of all individuals and communities. I know that improvements that needed to be made have been underway for some time, including through the Edi Action Plan. But Chief, could you please outline the service changes or improvements that have been made since the death of Mr. Abdi?
Okay.
Furthermore, Chief, I am still there. Furthermore, Chief, in light of the decision, what are the areas you will be focusing on next, and who do you think needs to be involved in the process?
Okay, thank you. We'll take that as a written inquiry. Are there any other inquiries?
Here, I have a second inquiry as well.
Member Nerman, go ahead.
Chief, the Ottawa Citizen on October 24th published a story titled Judge Tosses Drug Case After Ottawa Police Shocking Breaches of Basic Rights. Chief, I quote from the judge's decision, the fact that 2 senior and experienced drug unit officers so flagrantly disregarding fundamental rights related to the right to counsel is shocking. Each officer held a fundamental misapprehension of the right to counsel and the spirit of that right. Both claimed to be familiar with the duty to hold off after giving the right to counsel, but their evidence spoke to how little they actually understood of that right. Their ignorance of their basic charter protection is highly troubling. End quote. My question to you, Chief, is that I would like to know the policy and training to the officers of the OPS. What follow-up action or policy review you propose in this direction to avoid recurrence of such incidences, which brings disrepute to the organization and good work being done by majority of OPS members as a whole in our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that inquiry, Member Nerman. Okay, so we will move on now to items of business. We'll go through the consent agenda. Item number 1 is the Chief's verbal report. The Chief has a report, so we're going to hold that item and return to it. Item number 2, National Capital Area Crime Stoppers Semi-Annual Report. We'll also be holding this item. There is a presentation. Item number 3, Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. We'll also have a presentation on that item tonight, so we'll be holding that. Item number 4, the 2021 budget directions and timetable. We will hold this item as we have a presentation and a public delegation. And Councillor Meehan and I have a direction motion on that item. Item number 5, that the OAPSB labor seminar attendance be as outlined in the motion. Can we carry that item?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Item number 6, endorsement of the International Decade for People of African Descent. This is a motion that I placed on the agenda. This item came forward as a request from Ms. June Gervin. For those of you who don't know June, she's a community leader, activist, and philanthropist. She's been doing a lot of work in the community to promote the significance of the United Nations Decade of People of African Descent, and she has asked that the board consider its own endorsement of the decade. I feel that a specific commitment to the decade by our board is another way we can show we're taking steps to bring about lasting change. So you can see the motion. Maybe I'll read it just for participants who are listening. Whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service are conscious of the United Nations General Assembly proclamation of the period from 2015 to 2024 as the International Decade for People of African Descent in its resolution 68-237 of December 23, 2014. And whereas the decade was officially recognized by Canada on January 30th, 2018 and Ontario, February 2017, and was adopted by the City of Ottawa on the UN International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination on March 21st, 2018, and has since been recognized by the publicly funded education systems in Ottawa. Therefore, be it resolved that the Ottawa Police Services Board join the orders of government, the education system, and the equalist movement in Ottawa in adopting the intention of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent 2015 to 2024 with the theme Recognition, Justice, and Development with People of African Descent recognized as a distinct group whose human rights must be protected and promoted by the Ottawa Police Service. Can we carry that motion?
Carried.
Can I make a comment on this motion, Chair Deans?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm very glad to see the board endorse the International Decade for People of African Descent, especially since we're midway through. Black communities across Canada and Ottawa have started a new chapter in their relationship with all levels of government within the decade through the actions designed to really enable communities to collectively take concrete actions, as well as to lay a good foundation for medium to long-term engagement with government and public institutions, really in order to influence and keep them accountable, especially concerning investments, concerning fundings, policy and relationships that impact the Black communities. With all of the work that Black communities are undertaking in Ottawa to realize the 3 objectives of the International Decade, which include recognition, justice, and development for people of African descent, I'm very pleased to support this motion. And obviously another component of the idea of the decade is also a representation. So I'm also very pleased in that vein and gratified to have been recommended by Mayor Watson and unanimously appointed by my colleagues at Council to serve on the Ottawa Police Services Board. With the many challenges confronting the Black communities and obviously the wider community as well, from concerns surrounding equity in policing to the impact of the COVID-19 global pandemic on our neighborhoods and especially vulnerable residents, I'm very pleased to be able to take a seat on this board in order to bring a unique perspective and to provide insights as the council liaison for anti-racism and ethnocultural relations. In June, I was pleased that Member Nairman and I did work together and that the board established a partnership with the City of Ottawa's new anti-racism secretariat to ensure that the police service considers leading practices to address systemic racism. Like many around this table, I'm committed to substantive and rapid modernization, reorganization, and reform in order to enhance equity and inclusion, and in order to build greater public trust in the police service. So I'd really like to thank my colleagues on this board for their warm welcome and look forward to undertaking our core tasks to provide independent oversight over Ottawa's police service. And I am absolutely gratified to be able to have the opportunity in my first board meeting to ratify this very important endorsement. So thank you so much, other members of the board and Chair Deans.
Thank you, Mr. King. Is there anyone else? Because if there is, we're going to hold this item because it's just the consent agenda. So, okay, carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you.
Carried.
Okay, item number 7, update on the joint OPSB OPS strategy on workplace sexual violence and harassment. This is the presentation that came forward at the technical briefing on September 30th. It was listed on this evening's agenda in order to be formally received by the board. So can we receive the presentation?
Received.
Thank you. Item number 8, complaints report, part 5, Police Services Act, 3rd quarter 2020. Is this report received?
I have a question.
Okay, so we'll hold it and return to it. So that's item number 8 will be held. Item number 9, response to inquiry 1/2011, cruisers parking on sidewalks. Is it?
I have a question.
Okay, so we'll hold that item and return to it as well. Item number 10, response to inquiry 1/2012, handling of mental health calls. This item will be discussed during the Chief's verbal report. So if anyone has any questions, I suppose we could do it all at the same time. So receive.
I do have a question, but I'm happy to ask it during the report, during the presentation from the chief.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that's received. Item number 11, legal services status report, 3rd quarter 2020. Is this item received?
Received.
Received.
Thank you. Item number 12, board monitoring requirement status report, 3rd quarter 2019. Received?
Received.
Thank you. Item 13, outstanding board inquiries and motions, October 20th, or October 2020. Is that item received?
Received.
Okay. And item number 14, letters of commendation. Is that item received?
Received.
Received.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then there's 2, we've added 2 items to the agenda, but we'll hold those and return to them. So the first item of business on the agenda tonight is our public delegation, and it's Alexandra Galijanin. Mr. Galijanin, you have 5 minutes to address the Police Services Board. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. As I informed the board, my presentation will focus on an inconsistent disciplinary process and the impact it has on public confidence and trust. I would like to start off by reading 2 quotes that were provided to the CBC Street Talk team in 2018 regarding police. One is from a father, the other is from a university student. The father said, "If I saw police and gangs, I prefer gangs." The university student said, "Security here in this part of Ottawa is not too good. A lot of stabbings, a lot of fights. An increased police presence won't solve issues." Now, these feelings, they're emotionally charged feelings, and they're very real, and they are shared by various groups across the city. These feelings and beliefs, being rooted in emotion, they're going to be resistant to change. But the circumstances that they arise from, those, they can't always be fully understood or predicted by rational means. What we do know is that they come from somewhere and they are attached to policing. There can be 100 positive interactions, but all it takes is one negative one to create the conditions in which these feelings and beliefs manifest under. This brings me to my next point, that those feelings are a byproduct of both an inconsistent disciplinary process and organizational culture. What is inconsistent discipline and organizational culture? Instead of defining it, I'll paint a picture of what it might look like in a police context. An officer assaults a minor. A few years later, they go on to threaten and kill, to spill someone's blood, try to force a husband to human traffic his wife, demand that the father sells his child for money, or that the officer would kidnap that child and sell it himself. Allowing a person like that to be entrusted with a gun and a badge, let alone patrol responsibilities, that is inconsistent discipline. On the other hand, officers and crown prosecutors that rise in defense of these type of individuals, essentially disregarding their actions, that is organizational culture. With that said, now we can transition to public confidence and trust as they relate to the outcomes. So theoretical and empirical scholars on policing suggest that organizational factors are a major determinant of police misconduct and thus an important but often neglected part of the solution. If the OPSB truly wants to improve public confidence and trust, then you will need to consider the role of organizational culture and how it contributes to the cycle that perpetuates police misbehavior. The officer gone bad explanation points the finger at problem officers, when the problem is organizational factors that contribute to police misbehavior. Individuals do not arrive at police forces as bad cops. They are created by organizational culture. Let me repeat, individuals do not arrive at police forces as bad cops. They are created by organizational culture. All police departments and police boards need to stop telling themselves and the public that the blame for these outcomes lay entirely on these individual officers. These explanations are dishonest, but they are powerful enough to impede on any judicial, administrative, or departmental police reforms and ensure that such changes are unsuccessful. The most commonly agreed upon starting point centers around clear-cut HR policies that outline what is and what is not acceptable, and introducing zero-tolerance measures. Enacting these policies does not guarantee that nothing will ever happen again, but it does build confidence and trust because it tells the public where a police force stands when it comes to certain matters. To conclude my presentation, I want to say that I believe we are lucky to have a chief with the background expertise of Chief Slowly. He is a top caliber chief and a major upgrade from what we have had in the past. It is also refreshing to see a board that seeks adaptive solutions and is passionate about the role that they play in the outcome. I hope you all have the courage to continue making those tough decisions and learn from the ones that were short-sighted. I also want to leave you with a challenge. The challenge I want to leave OPSB and OPS brass with has to do with HR policy. All of you have had very successful careers ranging from government, business, and around law. Your professional networks extend far beyond Ottawa, so there should be no problem finding HR professionals that are willing to put their reputations on the line in defense of some of the more recent disciplinary outcomes. I challenge you all to find an HR professional that would support the decision to allow to keep a person with a gun and a badge, let alone patrol duties, after they threaten to harm someone or to kidnap a child and sell that child to the highest bidder. Reflect on this. You are all very respected across our city. So if you can't find an HR professional, could it be that there's room for significant improvement when it comes to HR policy? Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Mr. Galajanin, for being here tonight and participating and for offering your insightful views. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Okay, seeing none. Thank you again, Alex, for being here. Received on the public delegation? Received?
Received.
Received.
Okay, so then to the chief's verbal report. Chief Slowly, over to you.
Chair Deans, members of the board, bonsoir à tous, good evening. First of all, on behalf of all the members of the Ottawa Police Service, I'll start by welcoming Councillor Ralston King to the board. I've appreciated our conversations over the past year, and I've seen your leadership in action on a number of important issues facing Ottawa. We are all looking forward to working with you to accomplish the board's priorities and to improve the Ottawa Police Service's ability to serve and protect all residents in the nation's capital. Chair, like you, I want to recognize and thank the efforts of Mayor Jim Watson in his time as a member of the board. He brought needed leadership and stability during your extended period of absence. We are grateful for his stewardship along with his ability to enable the smooth transition with Councillor King. Let me turn now my thoughts to the trial verdict. We respect the court's decision last week. We know that no verdict can change a tragedy that happened 4 years ago when Mr. Abdi Rahman Abdi lost his life. His death has weighed heavily on his family, the local Somali community, and our entire city. It has also deeply affected all members of the Ottawa Police Service, especially the families of Constables Dan Monsian and Dave Ware and the officers themselves, along with all other members from the service who were directly involved in that tragic incident. No one can ever accept the loss of life in a situation like this, especially of a vulnerable citizen experiencing a mental health crisis. None of us, citizen or police, ever want to find ourselves in a situation like the one that took place on July 24th, 2016. We recognize the environment in which we deliver service, and we've heard the calls for change to the way we police. Those calls for change go well beyond the evidence presented and events surrounded at the trial. As a police service, we will continue to address a range of systemic issues: mental health, gender, race, etc., issues that are not unique to policing. We have also been seeking out better ways to help people who are in crisis. We are not doing this alone. We are working with community partners, academics, and subject matter experts to advance training, operations, and culture. One of the goals of this work is to help ensure that all members of our service are provided with the best support, training, and resources to fulfill their difficult duties. This will include addressing the intersectionality of the issues as it relates to our use of force and service delivery policies. We are listening, learning, and changing. We will support our service members and our community members through these changes. We are delivering neighborhood policing that improves community safety and well-being and builds relationships of trust. We want every community member and service member to feel respected, supported, and accepted, no matter their background, status, or circumstances. We will continue to move forward. Our community and our members deserve no less. Coming out from the trial verdict, we know that there is more work to be done as we move through the learning and the growing from this tragic incident. In accordance with the Police Services Act, we will be conducting an incident, service, equipment, and policy review. This includes a review of the conduct of all OPS members involved in the July 24th, 2016 incident. That process is already well underway, and we will work to finalize the review as expeditiously as possible. The results will be made public through the Ottawa Police Services Board. It's a good reminder this year of protest across this country, and particularly here in the nation's capital, of the work that our members have done to facilitate peaceful, lawful protest, and sometimes protest that goes beyond the lawful bounds in the nation's capital. Over the past year, members of the Ottawa Police Service, along with our public safety partners and community partners, have facilitated a wide range of public protest and peaceful marches in the nation's capital. This includes 3 separate events in the past week since the verdict. In all of these events, there have been 0 use of force and 0 injuries. Each event was planned and concluded safely for all members of the community and for all involved service members. There's been a question around what's happened over the last 4 years since July 24th, 2016. Over the past years, the Ottawa Police Service has been focused on continuous improvement in the face of some unprecedented challenges. We've made meaningful success in addressing past tragedies, as well as ongoing community member and service member frustrations. Here are some examples. In the area of recruiting and promotions, we've made major improvements in outreach recruiting, removing barriers for our diverse candidates and candidates from across the city to join this police service. This has resulted in a major increase in the quality and the diversity of all of our applicants and our new recruit hires. Since January 2020, the Ottawa Police Service has hired 79 recruits, of which 26 were women, that's 33% of the hires, and 28 were from racialized communities, that's 35% of our hires, and 2 were from our Indigenous communities. We've also promoted more female and racialized officers at all ranks. These results have occurred while maintaining the highest standards and advancing leadership throughout the organization. In terms of training, we've launched Towards Authentic Inclusion training, which is focused on bias-neutral policing. This training was designed with the community. It assists our members to become more understanding and aware of the different cultures that make up our community. We've also delivered fair and impartial police training to all members, which focus on unconscious bias. When it comes to equipment, we've expanded the deployment of conducted energy weapons, or CEWs, to all frontline officers. CEWs are one of the several less than lethal options available to police officers in Ontario. The goal of the expanded CEW deployment was to improve community and member safety. In terms of community engagement, we've created the Community Equity Council, or CEC, so that we can have more direct and timely discussions with key community leaders about the issues that are important to our racialized, Indigenous, and faith-based communities. Although the CEC has only been established over the last 18 months, in this brief time, they've already provided direct advice and guidance that has led to changes in our response to hate crimes, changes to our outreach and recruitment program that I mentioned earlier, the development and oversight of our Edi Action Plan, the direct support to changes in our organizational culture, specifically as they relate to systemic racism, as well as our ongoing planning and response to the changes that will result from the Montsion trial verdict. Our Edi Action Plan. We released the Edi Action Plan, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan, complete with this year's priority action items in February of 2020. The plan and this year's priorities were built on many different sources, including the recently released reports and significant inputs from police and community members. And they're a culmination of many meetings, interviews, and forums over the last 2 years. We've also worked very closely with the CEC on this plan. Neighborhood policing. The Ottawa Police Service created and implemented a neighborhood policing program in 2019 to better work with local community stakeholders, not-for-profit organizations, and city service agencies to manage complex crime and socioeconomic issues disproportionately impacting our neighborhoods. The program was launched with 3 NRTs in 2019 that doubled to 6 in 2020. These neighborhood resource teams include the following areas of the city: the Byward Market, Lower Town, Centertown, just deployed this month, Bayshore, Vanier Overbrook, Heron Gate, South Ottawa, and Carlington Caldwell. The 6 neighborhood resource teams include almost 70 officers. Today, we're also finalizing our new Ottawa Police Service organization structure. It was finalized over a year-long process to overhaul the Ottawa Police Services organization. The goals of the new organization include internally to reduce redundancies and improve efficiencies, increase information sharing and improve overall internal collaboration, reduce spans of control while removing internal silos, improving corporate risk management, and demonstrating a better return on investment, and to enable us to manage within our budget envelope. Externally, these changes are designed to expand our neighborhood policing program, as well as our crime prevention, integrated service teams, neighborhood engagement safety tables, our mental health crisis unit, as well as a variety of other community-facing programs. It's designed to overhaul our ability to be intelligence-led across the city in order to focus on reducing the impacts of social disorder, crime, and traffic safety issues in the rural, suburban, and urban parts of our city. And it is designed to align with and support the city's community safety and well-being plan to provide direct support, in particular, to the underlying causes of crime and the social determinants of health. Ultimately, the goal of this realignment and reorganization is to better serve the needs of our community members and our service members. You're going to hear more about the 2021 operating budget. During our budget presentation this evening, you're going to hear about several new initiatives in the 2021 year. This will respond and align to the calls that we've heard internally and externally for change. This includes investment in our financial commitment and participation in a larger mental health strategy for the city. This strategy will be designed, implemented, and evaluated and led by our public sector partners. We will support this and we will do our best to enable it to happen, but we will not be leading this effort. There'll be new training approaches that will include anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism, along with enhanced mental health training and de-escalation training for our members. There will be an increase in our neighborhood policing program that expands out to the suburban and rural parts of the city, and it includes an expansion of community police officers. We will also be increasing the resources to our sexual assault and partner assault units, specifically dedicating staff to support our programs for violence against women, along with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We'll be increasing internal supports for our members for their health and wellness, along with supports to address workplace harassment, specifically sexual violence and sexual harassment. Finally, we will begin the process of rebranding the Ottawa Police Service to better align with community expectations, to align with our service's values, honor, courage, and service, as well as our mandated requirement to deliver community policing, community safety, and well-being. I want to spend some time now talking about the great work by our members over the course of October. This is in addition to item number 14 on the board's agenda, which are letters of commendation which came in to the service from the community. These are the actions that we've captured over the last 4 weeks. The members of the Ottawa Police Service focus every day on serving the community. They're dedicated and compassionate, and their jobs are not easy. In my role as chief, every day I see and hear examples of how service members have positively touched the lives of residents. This month was no different, as evidenced by the following acts. Our tactical team, along with negotiators, worked with community mental health workers to save a man who was threatening to jump to his death from a 9th floor balcony last week. Our service members raised thousands of dollars for a woman who had been the victim of a knife attack by her partner and children in the recent few weeks. Neighborhood resource team members, Constables Eric Douglas and Wayne Clayton, were first to arrive on the scene of a motor vehicle collision with one of the vehicles on fire. They spotted passengers in the SUV and immediately ran to the back of the vehicle to pry open the hatch. They rescued the occupant and administered first aid. Constable Douglas stayed with the other passenger trapped in the front seat, administering first aid until fire services could arrive to extract her. The quick thinking of these constables and other officers who arrived saved the lives of the people who were trapped in that SUV. And this is according to the city coroner's office. Over the course of the last month, our officers seized 5 guns in 2 separate investigations. This year, officers from the Ottawa Police Service has seized 92 crime guns, as compared to 87 crime guns seized in 2019. This is part of an amazing overall year-to-date effort by Ottawa Police Service members and our community partners that has resulted in the following: the lowest number of shooting events in the past 5 years. Let me just repeat that. The lowest number of shooting events in the past 5 years. The lowest number of homicides in the past 5 years. And the highest number of crime guns seized in the past 5 years. That is completely opposite to the trends we've seen in other major jurisdictions across this country. Constable Andrew Bowen responded to a call about a teenager who had been reported to have overdosed. Once he arrived on scene, he administered naloxone. The first dose failed to work, so he administered 2 more doses, reviving the teenager, who was then transported to hospital. To date, frontline officers of the Ottawa Police Service have saved over 70 lives through the administration of naloxone. Constable Vince Arlotta was commended for his compassion when responding to a young woman in mental health crisis. The constable ensured the woman's mother was updated and let her know she was safe, as well as providing her mom with resources to help the young lady. Constable Arlotta managed to convince the young woman to attend the hospital for an assessment, which the mother said was astounding, as her daughter had refused to leave her apartment. The mother credited Constable Arlotta with saving her daughter's life. Constable Chris Wilson and Acting Sergeant Trevor Woods responded to a call from a resident who spotted people trying to break into cars in their neighborhood. On arriving, the officers discovered 3 men attempting to steal a car with a high-tech programming device and other tools. The men fled but were arrested nearby. While off duty, an officer intervened in an assault on a female by a man. During this intervention, the man bit the off-duty officer. The arrest was completed, but the officer needed to go for first aid. These are but a few examples of what we see and hear every day, and it's a reminder of why we all join policing and why I'm proud to be a member of the Ottawa Police Service and work alongside such great members. Coming to my conclusion now, Chair. As you mentioned earlier, 2 days from now, October 28th, will mark my first full year as Chief of Police in the City of Ottawa. It was at a board meeting on that day in 2019 that I gave my first verbal report to the board, in which I stated, the city and the citizens of Ottawa need our help. They want us in their neighborhoods and they want to work with us, but they first want us to fix our own house before we come and try to fix theirs. We need to create the conditions for a critical mass of progressive and inclusive leaders at the Ottawa Police Service to enable more transparent, consistent, and equitable decision-making. We need to develop and promote a more collaborative and innovative culture that results in more effective strategy, implementation, rigorous program evaluation, and continuous organizational improvement. No person, family, organization, or community is perfect. We all have strengths and weaknesses. The Ottawa Police Service is no different, but I am convinced that this police service has the people, the partnerships, and the potential to be the best in the country. I'm increasingly impressed with the dedication, compassion, and professionalism of the Ottawa Police Service membership. I truly believe that the police are the most visible element of a functioning democracy, so the police service of jurisdiction in Canada's capital city can and should be the leader in modern, inclusive, and effective policing in this country. There is much work to be done to bring this vision and mission to fruition. I know we can do this, but only if we work together as a team, between the board and the service, between management and the front line, between our members and our community partners. Chair Dean's board, a year later, these points still hold true for me. This has been one of the most challenging years for the public and for the police in living memory, certainly in my 30 years of policing. Despite these challenges, we have made significant changes in the Ottawa Police Service. I want to thank you, Chair, all the members of the board, all of the Ottawa Police Services members, and all of our community partners for your ongoing support. We have changed a great deal in the past year, and we will continue to change for the remainder of my tenure as Chief of Police in the Ottawa Police Service. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much too for your verbal report. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. I said when I was going through the consent agenda before we started that we wanted to discuss the mental health strategy going forward, because I think this is very concerning to the public, and we have one chance to get this right. And I know that it will take some time, but you did talk about the broad strokes. I think you should confirm for us that we're at the very beginning of this strategy, correct? So how will you go about ensuring that we have a comprehensive engagement strategy that involves, the mental health community, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color and cultural community, the broader public? How will we make sure that we have all of the right people at the table to get this strategy right?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Deans. Two small nuances, but I think they go in the direction of where you and the board would like to see this service going. Well, this is not a start. We have deployed mental health services from within the service for several years. Right now, we have 7 days a week, between 8 to 10 hours a day of a response capability where a police officer is paired with a mental health practitioner provided for by the local LIN. We're looking to expand those services as well as improve our ability to respond to persons in crisis. The second nuance that I wanted to speak about is we will be actively participating in and providing significantly increased resources to an expansion and an enhancement of the mental health strategy in the city, but we will absolutely not be leading that effort. We will be supporting it, participating in it, bringing meaningful and increased resources to it, but we're going to be relying on the leaders in the public health sector, in the not-for-profit sector, and our community leaders to make sure it's designed, implemented, evaluated, and continuously improved while staying at the table. I'm going to now ask Deputy Chief Steve Bell to provide a more complete answer to the process of moving forward, that I think that's at the heart of your question, Chair. Deputy Bell. Steve, if just on some sort of a mute there, if you can.
So yeah, sorry about that. Technical. I usually don't have those technical glitches, and I thought Chief promoted me to detective there, so I thought that was very exciting. So, so thanks, Chair Deans. I think it's a great question. We're really happy to have started this dialogue. We're really happy the interest that has occurred. There's been a lot of discussion around exactly how the Ottawa Police is going to go about doing this, and I think the place we want to hit on first and foremost is this isn't going to be the Ottawa Police that's going to undertake this on their own to try and develop, define, and refine any sort of mental health strategy within our city. In Ottawa, we're actually really fortunate. We have an immense amount of mental health practitioners, an immense amount of mental health resources that are available. So what we want to do is we want to actually look to how we work with those current practitioners, identify any sort of gaps that may exist in our system, so we can look how we coordinate and jointly deliver services from the time we take a call in to the time that we look to get support from our community members. So I know you asked specifically around how are we going to gather that sort of information, and what we're suggesting is that we will start to form out a consultation plan. We will bring that plan back in the very near future to the board, December or before, to the board for approval, so that they have line of sight, the ability to have some input on exactly how we're developing and implementing that consultation plan. And as part of that consultation plan, what we're going to do is we're going to look to make sure that we develop and identify a steering committee that will help us formulate a vision, help us formulate some overall guidance in terms of how we develop, how we gather the information, and then how we ultimately develop that plan moving ahead.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm glad you're going to bring that back so that we can talk about the holistic approach to this to make sure we get the engagement strategy correct. I'm wondering if we would ever consider hiring a third party, maybe like the Mental Health Association of Canada or someone like that, to help us do data analysis, because I think in part, we need to understand the data, how many calls there are, how many mental health calls are could be triaged in that way, what calls would be eligible. I think that we need to have information. I'm wondering if there's an association like the Canadian Mental Health Association that we might partner with to provide us that kind of data analysis.
So it's actually, it's a great point, Chair. Thanks for pointing that out. One of the things that we've identified really early on is that we need to get a better picture of our current state. And you are absolutely right. We're going to need some help in terms of bringing someone in to help us cache through the information we have, as well as have community partners work with us to try and identify how we can better manage those calls as they come in, and preferably look at how we manage those calls so that they actually never come into our call centers. So one of the things we will absolutely look at and bring back is how we can use third-party resources to help assist us moving this ahead, because it'll be a big undertaking for us, and it'll be something that we need help in.
Okay, thank you. There are plenty of questions. I'm going to go first to Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Chair Deans. I commented in June at an Ottawa Police Services Board meeting that the police service should work more towards enhancing mental health crises services, especially concerning the coordination of crisis response, which should primarily focus on intervention with health professionals rather than solely relying on sworn officers. This is why I'm really pleased that there is a proposed mental health crisis response strategy in this upcoming budget that will look towards social service organizations and the community to take the primary lead to address many of these challenges, which will also be based upon expanded public consultation, which I also support. I know we were talking specifically about data, Chair Dean, so through Chair Dean's point, is the OPS willing to a third party really undertaking this public consultation process? The moderation, or however it might be structured, where both social service organizations and the community comes to the table to provide a tremendous amount of input. So I'm just wondering if the OPS is willing to be a willing partner rather than a leading partner.
So, Councillor King, I think I got the gist of most of your question. For some reason, for me, you kind of bonked out in the middle there. What I can tell you is in the very early days, as we've started to have discussions around how we develop this consultation, how we engage partners, we know that there's many very exceptionally strong networks of service providers and community members within the organization, within the city. We've already reached out to 5 separate organizations to look at how, 5 different networks to look at how they can help us develop the consultation strategy, how they can help us develop exactly how we move ahead on it. So you have our absolute commitment that this has to be a strategy that's developed with the community, for the community, and by the community, because that's the only way in our assessment that there will be any sort of success to it. So we are very committed to bring our community partners in and partner with them, give as much influence over to them, because actually what we're shooting for is to decrease dramatically the number of crisis calls that we respond to, and hopefully get as many people aligned better through better access and coordination to mental health services upstream, so that we never actually have to show up to those crisis calls. They're getting the treatment helps and supports that they need early on. That's the overall emphasis and guidance that we're trying to take in this. So we'll absolutely be using community partners and taking their lead on this project.
Well, I'm gratified to hear that. I think that should be the goal, that we should really be attempting to ensure that the police service really never has to interface with people in this type of scenario. I mean, that would be the ideal. Of course, we have to work to get there. But I think it's very important to ensure that we have this are being confronted by sworn officers, and that there are proper supports that are available. So I think that does answer my question. I know that I cut out in the middle of it, but really around ensuring that, because we've heard that loud and clear from the community, that a third party, a different type of moderator is involved with leading the conversation with social services and community members at large. So I'm really gratified to hear that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair Deans, and thanks, Chief, for giving a wholesome picture, as always. So my comments are just adding to what my fellow board members and Chair Dean have said. And if you can enlighten me concerning this mental illness and interaction, I remember a few months before, I had raised an inquiry following a tragic incident in our province about the language barriers. And Chief, I think there is no dispute, and you will agree that the language interaction with the people with the mental illness plays an important role in de-escalating that. Now, in response to that inquiry, which was provided by the OPS, I found that few of the languages which are, because Ottawa is becoming a multicultural, we are over 1 million population now, few elements were missing. And one of the comment was that you have people handy in case you need a translators or something, they are on the call. I have discussed this few of the members, of course, informally. And this is one of the area I think you should be focusing on once a micro policy is prepared about giving an importance to the language skills with interaction with the people with the mental illness in de-escalating. Number 2 is about the budget and the resources. Of course, this is an important aspect and it is on the top of the priority. Now, if now or later, if you can advise us whether about the resources and the budget, you are pulling this from within the budget, you are diverting the resources from the budget, or adding this to the budget. So those were my two concerns, if I can have some enlightenment to that.
We'll answer the first one first. We are not asking for any more resources for the budget. We're working within our budget envelope as provided by the city, so no more resources are being requested. I'll queue up CAO Jeff Letourneau to speak more specifically to our recent results in recruiting and hiring. But I can tell you that my recollection is almost every single member that we are going to be hiring in the new class coming up speaks at least multiple languages. They're either francophone in English and/or they speak additional languages. So I have seen that trend line in policing for well over 15 years, where increasingly our classes, the diversity includes language skills. Certainly that has gone to the highest levels I've seen in the 2020 recruiting that we've done here in the Ottawa Police Service, and what is projected to be hired into 2021. But Jeff Letourneau may have additional insights into what his team is doing around identifying language assets as in addition to all the other quality and diversity assets we're bringing into the organization. Jeff, can you provide additional insights to Member Nerman?
Sure, Chief, thank you. So far in 2020, we've hired 79 sworn recruits. The quality and competence is off the charts. I'll actually be talking about that in a little more detail later during the budget directions presentation. Of the 79, well over half are bilingual, and 23 of those 79 speak additional languages. There's a total of 15 additional languages spoken over and above French and English. So these are one of the skill sets and factors that the sworn recruiting team is looking at to bring on board in terms of competence and diversity. It's not just diversity of race, it's also diversity of background, volunteerism, employment, along with education and languages spoken.
Nerman, in addition to that, thank you, Jeff. In addition to that, we're also looking at advances in technology. Under Deputy Chief Steve Bell, we've put smartphone devices in the hands of our frontline officers. That provides the opportunity for real-time translation services that are available through our communications center. There are abilities for us to tap into translation services. And as we get into the onset of next generation 911, those abilities will increase. So hiring alone will not address all of the communications needs that you've raised in your inquiry, sir, but through the human capital and technology, we're going to get a lot better in that in the very near future.
Thanks, Chief. I have one follow-up. Now, you have advised that no additional budget resources will be requisitioned, meaning that you are doing from within the budget which has been allocated to you. So will this affect any important or any frontline services if you are diverting those budget to this cause?
Yeah, it's an important question. If I understand behind it meaningfully, are we changing our frontline service delivery model? Will members of the public receive something less or something more? Most of this is coming from ongoing efficiency and reallocation of internal resources. That said, we've had a number of questions already on this call that clearly indicates you want an increased focus. We all want an increased focus on mental health services. So inevitably, as the community expresses its priorities, as the board expresses its priorities, as our own members express their priorities, we will shift resources to new and emerging priorities. That will inevitably mean at some point we'll do more of something and less of something else. As of right now, we feel that our basic core services that we've been delivering, and again, we'll touch on that in the budget presentation coming up, will maintain themselves. We'll expand in some areas, as we've already referenced, in neighborhood resource teams, crime prevention, and that means that we will do less in other areas. For instance, we are going to be absorbing the pivot unit that was primarily focused on guns and gangs and drug suppression to enhance our neighborhood resource teams. That's an example of a change in service delivery in terms of how the community receives those services. But we believe that that expansion of our neighborhood resource teams is actually underpinning the huge drops in terms of gun violence and homicides in the city. So yes, we will make changes to service delivery, one that aligns to community and board expectations, and ones that achieve public safety outcomes, meaningful and significant public safety outcomes.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Member Nerman. Member Smallwood.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chief, for that, and Deputy Steve Bell for that presentation. The issue of mental health responses is not unique to Ottawa, and the concern about it is not unique to Ottawa. We've seen this right across North America. This is a hugely important issue. So I'm delighted to see the action you're taking, and I think, as has been suggested, the details are yet to be worked out. One of the things that I want to make sure I understand going forward is just how we'll change the triaging of calls that come in. And I noticed in the report, you mentioned about an increase in training for all communications staff. And I just wondered, is it possible that you give a brief idea of how much mental health training and the ability to identify mental health calls do our existing call takers get? And would you see a complete switch to people who have extensive training, or is this just an additional bit of training that our current staff would get? So if you can give me an idea of just how the intake of calls, what we might see in terms of how that will change. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Member Smallwood, Vice Chair Smallwood. I'll again call on Deputy Chief Steve Bell to speak specifically to the intake of calls as a portion of the overall strategy. All of our members, including our communication members, will receive additional training, the details of which I can't provide now. And if there's a desire for a greater depth of information on the actual training that our call takers take as it relates to mental health and addictions calls, I'll have to provide that as a response to an inquiry later on. But Deputy Bell, if you're able to provide some more insights in terms of intake and triage of calls as we anticipate in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chief, and thanks, Vice Chair Smallwood, for the question. So I want to caveat it with the important part of consultation is we actually have to actively work with our community and listen to what they say in terms of how we develop our model. We have some preliminary ideas. One of those preliminary ideas is specifically around the intake of calls from our 911 center. We actually think that we could expand that potentially to include other intake areas like 311, other output areas like 211, to have a more comprehensive system. We know that other jurisdictions have looked at enhancing the training for all of their 911 call takers and all of their dispatchers. But beyond that, have also looked at embedding mental health professionals right within their communication centers to better dialogue, assess, triage, potentially redirect a caller who comes into a different service other than an actual police response. So those are all the types of areas that we're currently looking at. Capacity that we believe will be really important to our system and our entire mental health strategy, that will look at intake, response, and access and coordination to other community services. But again, I put the caveat on it. We have some good ideas that we think will be really, really beneficial to implement, but it's going to be really important that when we go out with our ears wide open and listen to our community and actually have those dialogues and discuss with them our intentions so that we can work together to build a better system.
Thank you. Yes, that answers it. Thank you. And I certainly look forward to those conversations and see where it leads us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Member Smallwood. Member Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. This is a really important initiative. And I'm really very supportive of the plans that have been discussed this evening, and think that this is a move in an important direction. I just wanted to get a bit of an idea of where we are at now with this. So in some of the materials provided in the response to the inquiry, and some of your comments tonight, you talked about a 7-day a week service, 8 to 10 hours a day, and that they're paired with the mental health unit officers are paired with mental health staff. And I just wanted to get an idea of how many calls they're currently attending, how many mental health officers that are trained in mental health do we have? And my understanding from other reports is that we have about 6,000 calls that include mental health concerns overall. So I guess I just wanted to get a sense of where we're at now in terms of the number of calls that are being handled by these mental health unit officers and in combination with mental health workers. Thank you.
Steve, are you able to take a run at? Okay.
So absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson, for the question. I actually would put much of this back to Chair Dean's comment early on. It's going to be important for us right from the outset to get a much better and more comprehensive data-informed picture of where we are. Anecdotally, you will hear us say that our calls for service around mental health or people involved in mental health have dramatically increased over the past 20 years. There's estimates that up to 40% of our calls for service actually involve people with mental health issues or situations that are contributed to by the mental health of someone that we're responding to or with. Chair Dean's captured it really well. It's going to be so important that we actually do a really wholesome, fulsome job of getting a better idea of the data we have, the information that we know, so we have a much more clear picture of exactly the problem that we're trying to identify and work with. And then in the end, so that we can actually make sure that whatever systems we develop and implement with our community are actually being effective to have better outcomes for the people of the city. So I can collect a number of stats. What I would suggest and hope to be able to do is to let us get into the beginning stages of this strategy and the development of it, because data and the use of data is going to be a very important driver for us, and we want to make sure that we have the cleanest, crispest picture of that data to be able to present.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Member Sueda.
Thank you, Chair Deans and Chief and Deputy Chief. And I apologize if I'm going to be asking a question that was already answered because I joined the meeting a little bit late. But I'm really happy to hear about the focus towards mental health. It's something that's dear to me, and I know a lot of other members have also expressed an expanded service in how the OPS deals with mental health calls. The question I have is, have we identified the various institutions that address mental health to be involved, such as the mission and other types of institutions? So I think this will go a long way in terms of understanding a complete picture of who we want, well, not who we want, but who should be involved in this process.
So, Chief, you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, go ahead, please,
Okay.
Steve.
Thank you, Member Sueda, for the question. Ottawa's extremely rich in mental health services and mental health supports. We're actually very fortunate within our city for the number of agencies we have that do provide services to our community. One of the important early tasks is going to be for us to engage, as everyone's talked, some of those key networks that provide those services. We've already started to do that and to have those discussions, but in terms of mapping and identifying specific stakeholders and partners, that's what we're going to do as we flush out and actually develop our consultation plan and ultimately do that consultation. So for us to be able to say that we're going to use this service or this service to actually help us develop, it's far too premature for us. But we do know that we have many strong partnerships, many excellent service providers within the city who have already identified that they're very keen to help us develop this strategy and actually implement it over the next 3 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Sueda. I don't see any other, Member Mahan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get clarification. We have heard members of the public say that they want us to slice off a part of our budget, the Ottawa Police Service budget, and just give it to the mental health resources in the city. They would like to see a separation of those two. And I'm wondering if you could just address why I don't think this is quite possible at this stage. If you can just clarify that for us.
Thank you, Member Meehan. It relates to an ongoing dialogue that I've been having on this topic. But again, let me restate it. This was a process that didn't work out too well from a health standpoint back in the 50s and 60s, where growing dissatisfaction, a series of tragedies and question marks around the efficacy of mental health services being provided within an institutional setting led to the massive defunding of mental health institutions, hospitals, and associated facilities back in the 50s and 60s. That happened in a very short period of time. The funds were not adequately redistributed into community, and that meant that police services, for the most part, not-for-profit sector in addition, had to catch all of this without adequate funding, without an adequate transition plan, without the data that Deputy Chief Bell talked about, without a long-term sustainable and scalable plan. And that has resulted, quite frankly, in many more tragedies and many more wastes of dollars. Let's not repeat the same mistake again in the 2000s that we did 50 years ago. My second point is, at least from my knowledge, the areas of North America and the other parts of the world that have successfully created an integrated human services model that addresses the social determinants of health, not the least of which are mental health and addictions issues, did not defund their police. In Scotland, in Portugal, in Eugene, Oregon, where the CAHOOTS model has been so famously developed around mental health services that do not involve police services, in none of those cases did they defund the police in order to fund the adequate services. They continued to fund the police. They expected different outputs and outcomes from the police, and they expected the police would integrate their operations into a broader social safety net. And that was done successfully. So the academic best practice that I have found, the practical best practice that I've seen, and again, I stand to be corrected. Maybe there's a model out there that I'm not aware of, but so far from what I've seen, it is not defund one to fund the other. It's fund everything appropriately, work differently together, and achieve differentiated outcomes that are ultimately going to be more cost effective and actually produce better safety and services for the broader community.
So there's no standalone. That model just could not possibly work at this juncture.
Again, I'm not saying it could not possibly work. It has not worked in the past. The best practices that I'm aware of have not included a defund model. They have all included a fund properly, evaluate year over year, and then make informed resource decisions based on good data, good evaluation, and good coordination.
And when we have the consultations with the mental health service providers within the city, we'll get as a municipality, we'll get a better picture of what their budgetary requirements would be in order to participate as an equal partner in this new model. So
hopefully we'll have that. In addition, we'll also have their views on what best, if not evidence-based best practice looks like. And again, we'll take our cue from them. If they have a different approach that exists somewhere else in the world, a made in Ottawa solution, we're all in supporting that. But simply saying we're going to carve out X percentage of dollars and hand it off to unknown parties without any sort of a transition plan, a sustainment plan, a scalability plan, an evaluation plan, I think is irresponsible and quite frankly dangerous.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Meehan. I don't see any other members of the Police Services Board who want to speak, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge my council colleagues who have joined us this evening, and one of them has asked to speak, so I'm going to allow that. So Councillor Matt Fleury.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I was looking to participate in the inquiry response, so I'll wait for that period. Apologize.
I don't quite understand what you're referring to, Councillor.
Well, in the inquiry, there are two inquiry responses, one on sidewalks and one on mental health, and wasn't sure in this commission.
The mental health one was carried. Was the sidewalk one carried?
So would this then be appropriate to raise at this point, or shall I wait for later in the agenda?
Well, mental health we're talking about right now, so that one is appropriate. So
okay, yeah, so I'd be glad to, and can you hear me well, just to make sure?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the updates. I guess what I'm curious in the mental health response is, we see a number of rises in calls for emergency response due to mental health crisis, and there are references to services, but it's unclear about. So we have a relationship with the Ottawa Hospital. I remain unclear how many nursing teams or mental health professionals or officers are dedicated to that partnership. It was unclear by the response.
Steve, can you provide a more detailed overview of the current MHU services that we have in Ottawa?
Yeah, so currently we have a mental health unit team that has 5 dedicated officers and a sergeant in it. And those, with that team, what we have is we have a memorandum of understanding with the Ottawa Hospital, and they provide mental health practitioners that go and do follow-ups on calls that we've received around people that we've responded to, usually more than once on multiple occasions, to look at how they can respond and support those people within the mental health system. The other thing that they do is they'll often attend with forms that have been issued by either medical practitioners or by justices at the request of families to look at how they can apprehend and get people to seek mental health treatment. Our whole plan is to actually look at how we work with the community to enhance those capacities, to actually refine and better deliver crisis response in circumstances. But most importantly, how do we access and work with mental health practitioners within the community to make sure that people who are in escalating mental health crises, how they're actually triaged and looked to be provided supports within the community that likely already exist.
And Councillor, if I can just add onto that, ultimately a strategy to be truly successful, we'll have to look way downstream before anyone is in crisis, before there's any aspect of violence or criminality that would require the work of the police. And to be clear, no matter what the strategy is in the future, there will always be some element, hopefully a significantly decreased element of those calls, where there is violence and or criminality present in the call that will require the police of jurisdiction, in this case, the Ottawa Police Service, to respond. Any successful strategy has to prevent the crisis from happening for the most part, have different options that don't include the police to respond to some call for service, whether it be out in rural Ottawa or in downtown Ottawa within your ward area, Councillor. And then some smaller portion, hopefully decreasingly smaller proportion, that the police would still have to be dispatched to, but they would be dispatched to with better equipment, better training, and better all supervision and supports to achieve even more consistent outcomes. And my last point, 6,000 calls per year that our frontline officers respond to. And I gave some examples over the last month, the vast majority of which are handled successfully and safely by officers who literally have to turn themselves into a Swiss Army knife in order to find the right combination of services and supports for people at their worst and most vulnerable period. And they do so amazingly successfully and consistently. But we do have tragedies, and we've talked extensively about the tragedy to Mr. Abdi. And we need to double down, triple down, quadruple down our collective efforts, both within the police service and across civil society, to prevent those things from happening in the future.
Maybe a quick follow-up to that. So if I focus on the calls for service, and to me, you're right that there's a full spectrum of, can we be more proactive and ensure the supports are in place well ahead of time so incidents don't happen. But when a call comes into 911 and it is not health related or fire, your team goes out. How do you see the evolution of that response? Do you foresee kind of almost like a paramedic-like, but for mental health response to those calls, or like I'm unclear about from a pure call service and response to that, how that's to be shifted?
I'll do my best to answer succinctly, but with the big caveat that both the deputy and I have been making over and over again. How we describe it and how we envision it is not necessarily how the practitioners who lead in the public health space and the mental health space will ultimately design this thing and implement it. So if you're asking us right now, where we are right now, we could envision a trained mental health practitioner who may or may not be employed by us, but who's embedded in our call-taking 911 system on a 24/7, 365 basis, who, when any type of call comes in that has any element of mental health and addictions, will first assess the nature of the call, secondly, assess the nature of the right response. And that might be a 311 response, it might be a 211 response, it might be a 911 response, but they'll be a better position to assess the nature of the response. And then it might be an actual response from a police car, or it might be a referral to someone to a local not-for-profit or 201 support service that has nothing to do with the actual police service, except that it would come in through our operations center. That would be making effective use of public dollars already paying for a 24/7, 365 ops center. It would make use of trained mental health practitioners who are not part of the Ottawa Police Service, but are there to support the needs of the 1 million people in the city. And it will limit the amount of times that we actually have to dispatch a police officer or a police response to any one of these calls for service. That's an example, but again, we are open completely to our leaders in the public health sector, the not-for-profit sector, and specifically the mental health sector to design what that should look like in the future. And we're committed to putting resources to support the enablement of that ultimate vision.
I mean, not all I care about, but one of the important things is that one of the successes of 911 and the emergency response is immediacy. And I feel on the mental health and addiction side, it's important to ramp up to having services that are available and quick response from a mental health approach. Maybe on the final point, Madam Chair. So on the ground, officers are struggling with this reality where individuals suffering from addictions and mental health, they'll be called, for example, for an issue in a particular business or in a particular area, and they struggle with that. And I've seen the motivation level or the struggle level continue to increase because we're not, those relationships between a response on the ground and a mental health addictions provider are not necessarily they're not as effective. So how could we there's an entire discussion to have, and I can appreciate what you're saying, but is there not easy low-hanging fruits in terms of discussions with CMHA Ottawa, with the Royal, with others where we can equip officers as part of today's response with supports? Because that's where I see kind of the churning wheels. And I bet if you looked at those calls, I'd be interested to look at individuals behind those calls. How many individuals do you have as part of those 6,000 calls? I bet we'd start to see some trends there.
Councillor, thank you. You've raised a number of critically important issues. First of all, while our officers struggle, they do an amazingly consistently high value job in going to those calls for service. It's probably been the main reason why the police have kept this volume of mental health calls for so many decades. We all agree, and I would struggle to find a police officer. I know I won't find a police chief anywhere in this country that wants to continue to be the primary deliverer of mental health services in any community, rural or urban or suburban across Canada. We all want to get out of this business as much as we possibly can, but as safely and effectively as we can. The other point you raised, the speed of response is important. And again, I go back to that, defund the police, shift the resources over to some other capability that is not there, and you will have a much lower response, a much more varied response, and I think far more tragic responses than if we go through a measured process of integration and coordination. Finally, I've talked about the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan extensively. There'll be a presentation coming up shortly. The question has been asked by other board members. It's been answered by Deputy Bell and myself. Data is important. You're absolutely right. There is a case history to almost every single one of those 6,000 calls for service. But right now, absent an actual plan to integrate our services, and that means integrating our data Sharing data about individuals, about trends, about capabilities, that is critical. And Deputy Bell referenced that multiple times. That is absolutely critical and central to a properly coordinated and measured transition and integration of services. Simply taking money and throwing it somewhere else does not create that capability. It will reduce the time for service. It will actually increase the silos and the lack of information sharing going on. The plan we're laying out does not put us at the head of the parade. It puts us in the middle of the parade, bringing material resources to that. But it puts the people who have the most data, the most expertise, and the most ability to help our frontline officers and to take the load off those frontline officers at the front of that parade.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. One more councillor has asked and promised to be brief. So Councillor Menard, over to you.
Great. Can you hear me, Chair Deans?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. And thanks to the Chief for the presentation tonight. I'm very happy to hear about the fact that the Police Services Board and OPS wants to move in the directions of public consultations. I think that's vitally important to get the experts in the room to make sure that we've got that type of coordination. So appreciate hearing that. I only have one question, and it's around the CAHOOTS model and what they've done there. It looks like from the research that I've done that they've got about 26,000 calls a year, and in those calls, only 150 had required police support, where they called them to come with them, and that program handled 18% of the calls in that year. That was 2019. And so that's a great record. It's also funded from the police budget, from that local police budget. Sorry, my kids are in the background if you can hear them there. And so by diverting those calls away from law enforcement, the clinic that runs the program, the Whitebird Clinic, estimates that CAHOOTS saves, about $8.5 million in public safety spending each year. Is that type of model open here in Ottawa? Is that what you're talking about when you say consultations? Or are you talking about always a co-responder model? I just want to be clear on what we're open to here.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor. The CAHOOTS model at this point may be the most over-referenced and maybe overexposed model out there, but you've referenced some key points that seem to be missing quite often from people referring to the CAHOOTS model or other similar type models. Again, as I said, the CAHOOTS model wasn't accomplished overnight by a defunding and refunding exercise. It was a partnership that came together between police and the civil society, including providers like the Whitebird Clinic, that designed a new approach. Funding did not come from defunding the police, it came from funding the police, but expecting different outputs and different outcomes. For instance, having a call take and dispatch process that triage calls right at source and allowed for either a police response where there's violence or criminality, or a non-police response, the majority of which was taken up by the CAHOOTS program embedded in the Whitebird model. It took years of coordination and development to get to the point where you're talking about the outcomes that you're now describing in 2019. That did not happen in year one. It took years of development. So now they're seeing the fruits of their labor, which includes the opportunity to take resource demand away from police and put it better into community to get better outcomes for everybody. And the funding still goes through the police budget. Now, that is one version of 100 different potential models we can look at. So we are very open to looking at all of the best practices, including the CAHOOTS model. Ultimately, that is going to be a design run by public health leaders, mental health experts that we will support and contribute to.
That's great. I really very much appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to taking part in those consultations. And certainly, CAHOOTS was started in 1989, so definitely some time to get to where they were. Thanks very much for the response.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Menard. I don't see any further questions. So, Chief, thank you for your verbal report. And maybe I would just wrap up this by saying there is a lot of interest in our mental health response moving forward. And I think as a police services board and a police service and a community, we all recognize that we can do a better job, and there is a movement that we need to make. And I think we are all very committed to moving in that direction. So I'm hoping that tonight's discussion, I'm glad some of the members of council joined the discussion tonight, because I'm hoping that it will start to become clear that we're all in this together, and we all understand that we need to make a sea change in how we're responding to mental health calls in order to best serve our community. And we will get there. And as I said at the very beginning, it will take some time, and it will certainly take a big community effort, but I believe that we can make a significant change. And the one thing I'm absolutely sure of is that this board sitting at this table at this time is committed to getting a significant change in the way we do policing in Ottawa and the modernization of policing. So thank you, Chief. Thank you to everyone who participated in this, and we'll look forward, Deputy Chief Bell, to your bringing that plan back sometime around December for us to talk about the go forward plan. So thank you very much. And we will just move on with our agenda now. The next item on the agenda, so received on the Chief's the verbal report? Received. Thank you. Okay, so the next presentation is from the National Capital Area Crime Stoppers semi-annual report. So I'll now ask Mr. McMullen to walk us through his brief presentation on the National Capital Area Crime Stoppers semi-annual report.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we appreciate the opportunity once again to provide the board with this semi-annual update. I'm reminded that about 9 years ago, my predecessor began this process, and I've had the good fortune to be able to deliver these reports for the last 8 years as the chair and president of the program. So thanks for that opportunity. First, I'd like to just add my congratulations personally and on behalf of our board to Chief Slowly for your upcoming 1-year anniversary. I was privileged to be at your first presentation in 2019, and here we are again. So that's a great milestone, and looking forward to seeing you again. The COVID-19 continues obviously to have a significant impact on our program, just as it does on every other sector of our community and society. Like many, we've had to pivot to this new normal, and I'm pleased that our board of directors, our volunteer board, has continued throughout this process to meet monthly in a virtual environment, and done so quite successfully. We were all very sad to learn of the passing of our board member and friend, David Smith. As everyone knows, Dave was a dedicated member to this program and a supporter of Crime Stoppers and certainly youth in our community. And even while ill, Dave continued to attend our monthly meetings. I know how much has been said in the community about his commitment to the city and how much he was a champion for Ottawa. And I can tell you that I had a front row seat to his contribution and enjoyed his friendship for many, many years. So very, very sad to see Dave passing, and we're going to miss his contribution. As you may know, we made our decision to cancel our annual fundraising golf tournament, typically held in the summer. This is a significant financial revenue piece to our program that was missing this year. Not how we expected to celebrate our 31st anniversary in the community. We've also had to pivot around from a financial perspective to engage in support. You know, one of the challenges we have is we don't have a trumpeting of success, or we can't tell some of those success stories that, you know, I know of, and I can tell you that our police service knows of. But again, to protect the anonymity of our tipsters, we don't ever go out and acknowledge those successes. And that sometimes is a challenge, especially specifically around fundraising. What we chose to do early in the summer is to basically go out with a letter campaign to the business and local communities, as well as our former golfers. They have attended our golf tournaments in the past, and solicit donations from them. And I'm happy to report to date, we've accepted almost $10,000 in charitable donations from a variety of sources, local businesses, groups, as well as the private donors answering our call to help. And that's been very, very important. As well, several of our city councilors have helped in making mention of Crime Stoppers on their social media, as well as in their newsletter and bulletins that go out to the community for help. And that's instrumental. You know, as I mentioned, Crime Stoppers has been serving this community for 35 years, helping to contribute to those public safety outcomes. And, you know, again, looking at our statistics, which is something we do share regularly, I'm encouraged to see that our tip numbers are almost identical to those of the same period last year. And we're on target to achieve similar numbers to what we've observed over the last 6 or 7 years. That being about 4,000 tips from the public a year. So far this year, we've provided 18 or over 18 arrests, 11 criminal cases being cleared, 43 criminal charges, over 9,000 in narcotics being seized, illegal narcotics, and recovered arms is 3 thus far this year. So those are the types of contributions that the Anonymous Tip program delivers to this community. And I think it's vital for us. Interestingly enough, and not surprising, we've seen the tip award number reduce significantly, and that's to be expected with some of those metric numbers being less. The Ontario Association of Crime Stoppers held their annual training conference and annual general meeting this summer. We were pleased to provide attendance to that and learned and got to share some of the best practices from the other 37 Crime Stoppers programs around Ontario. As you may know, our Constable Getz has served on the Ontario Association of Crime Stoppers board during the last year, and we're anticipating that her term is going to be extended into the upcoming year as well. And her involvement's been welcome, not only from our perspective, but from the perspective of the OACS. To have a strong representation from Eastern Ontario has been a wonderful addition. The some new things that we've been working on is we're excited to begin working more closely with our Via Rail police partners, and we expect to have additional training available for their members in the next coming weeks. And we continue to work with our post-secondary institutions to help raise awareness and support them and their communities specifically. January, as you may recall, is Crime Stoppers Month across Canada, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to participate at a number of events around our region. In the meantime, we've been working hard at developing some social distance techniques using some technology. Constable Getz has produced an informative video that we hope will be successful in sharing in public venues, especially as Crime Prevention Month initiatives roll out in the coming months. As I mentioned, fundraising continues to be a challenge, and I can tell you that our program has the resources to continue. We need more resources to sort of build up those reserves again and help us be an impactful community partner for the city and the police service as we move forward. So donations are always accepted at crimestoppers.ca, and be welcome to take any questions you may have.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. McMullen? Chief Slowly?
Chair, not a question, just a comment I referenced in my verbal report. This year in Ottawa, thanks to the efforts of our members and our community partners, we've seen the highest number of crime guns seized. We've seen the lowest number of shootings and the lowest number of homicides in 5 years. I believe one of those key community partners is Crime Stoppers Ottawa, and I'm grateful for the ongoing partnership between Mr. McMullen and his tiny mighty team and ours. And that has literally saved lives and reduced crime in this city. And so I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. And Mr. McMullen, thank you on behalf of the board for the important work that you're doing in our community. We greatly appreciate your efforts, and thanks for coming out tonight and sharing the good work that you're doing with the board.
No worries, I'm happy to do it. And on a minor note, I might just acknowledge we've got one of our volunteer board members celebrating 25 years of volunteering in this program in this community. And I can tell you, I reached out to Chief Slowly to see if he'd provide some recognition for this valuable member of our team, and very thankful for the Chief and the OPS for acknowledging that and taking part in that. You know, community partnerships are vital, I believe, to the community and certainly to the police service. And we're proud to be contributing partners for such a long period. So thanks for the support and the words of encouragement. I'll pass them along to our board members, and thank you all.
Thank you, and congratulate that board member on 25 years. That's an incredible amount of service.
Yeah, I definitely will, Chair. It's a significant milestone for sure. We're fortunate to have several committed board members, both volunteers. We've got a really dynamic and strong youth team. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to participate at too many events. I should point out we attended one event with our policing partners in August at the Garage 529, and it was a great way to connect with the community. And I can tell you it was a safe environment. There were two young constables that really drove that whole project, and they're to be commended for not only the way they provided interaction with the community, but just for their leadership to take a leadership role in something important like bike theft, which impacts a lot of folks. You know, for some folks, it's their main mode of transportation to and from education or work. And so it was nice to be part of that. Constable Getz and I attended on behalf of our program, and it was great. There was Yippee members there supporting, and other OPS members. So great to see that level of community engagement. And we're looking forward to participating in future events.
Great. Okay, well, thank you again. Received on the report. Received. Thank you. Okay, item number 3 is the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And I asked Mr. DeMonte to come this evening and with Lisa Patch and Valerie Bietlo to do a presentation. I happen to be of the opinion that the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan is a foundational document for this city, and that we should really see this as an opportunity to rethink much of what we're doing in the community. Ultimately, community safety and well-being is everything, and so I think it's really important that the board be aware and participate in this along the way. And that's why I've invited them here tonight. Mr. DeMonte, before I hand the microphone over to you, we wanted to know who is running your PowerPoint presentation so we can allow them access.
Chair, that's a good question. I have both Valerie and Lisa with me. I'm assuming that it was sent over to your clerk, but by your question, I presume that's not the case.
Do you want the clerk to run the PowerPoint for you?
I believe that would be ideal, yes.
Okay, then that is what will happen. Okay, so Mr. DeMonte, thank you for taking the time to come out tonight and present the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bonsoir, et merci de l'invitation d'être avec vous. Thank you, Chair, for the invitation to present the work done to date on the City of Ottawa's Community and Safety Wellbeing Plan. I have with me this evening the manager of our Public Policy Unit, Valerie Bietlo, and our lead on this important foundational work, as you've described, and I concur with you, Lisa Patch. I'll turn it over to them for the presentation, and we'll all be available afterwards to respond to any clarification or questions the members of the board may have. I think that's the important part of this. Once you get an overview of what we've done so far, where we're at in our process, then we can open up for questions. So Valerie and Lisa, c'est à vous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Demonte. Merci, Madame la Présidente. It's Valerie Biello here. Today, we'll be providing you with an overview of the legislative requirements and the prescribed areas of focus of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan to give you a bit of a background. We'll also describe our journey so far in terms of planning for the plan and our development approach, what we heard through stakeholder and public consultations on safety and well-being, and where we are in the process currently. Given that the Ottawa Police Service has been a key partner in our work so far, we'll also highlight how the OPS has been involved and continues to be involved in the development of the process. And then finally, Lisa will set out for you the next steps to be taken this year, and then in 2021, as we embark on the next phase of public and stakeholder engagement to produce the final draft Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan to Community and Protective Services in the fall of 2021 and to Council for consideration. So what you have before you now is a timeline of the key milestones on this journey to develop Ottawa's first Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. In 2018, Madam Chair, you may recall that the Provincial Safer Ontario Act was passed, which, among other things, required that municipalities in Ontario prepare and adopt a Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. So that was the starting point from a legislative perspective. As a result, in November of 2018, as part of its governance review, City Council directed that the General Manager of the Emergency and Protective Services develop and draft a Community and Safety Wellbeing Plan for Council approval. At the same time, Council also directed that Crime Prevention Ottawa Board of Directors act as the plan's advisory committee. Following that, in May of 2019, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan Unit was established within the Public Policy Development Service. As Mr. Demonte has said, Lisa Petch is the policy lead for the development of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. In October of 2019, City Council further approved a planning roadmap to develop the plan, which Lisa will outline and describe for you a little bit later in this presentation. So the red arrow that you see on this slide indicates where we are currently in this timeline. The interim report that was presented to CPSC committee on October 15th presents the priorities for the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. This interim report will rise to City Council for consideration this week on Wednesday. Lisa will describe the 6 priorities for the plan a little bit later in this presentation as well. She will discuss the plan's priorities, the public and stakeholder engagement activities that were undertaken so far that have gotten us to this point, and also the next steps for the second phase of stakeholder and public engagement to develop the plan that, as I said, will be presented next year. Next slide, please. So, Madam Chair, I think it's important to just take a minute to note again that the plan is legislatively required and somewhat prescribed. As I said, provincial legislation gives us the 4 squares of the plan and states that a municipality must do several things as it is planning for its plan and developing its plan. The first thing, of course, is that municipalities have to prepare and adopt a plan by a date to be determined by the province. And while this original deadline was January 1st of 2021, that deadline will be extended due to the pandemic. The Solicitor General of Ontario is currently consulting with AMO to determine what the appropriate new deadline will be. The second point to note is that the legislation requires a municipality to have an advisory committee with specific membership that is representative of the community. In Ottawa, we have done that through the Crime Prevention Board of Directors, the membership of which has been amended to meet the legislative requirements for the advisory committee. The third point is that municipalities are obligated to consult with their advisory committee. with members of the public, including youth, members of racialized groups, and of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, as well as community organizations in developing its plan. Municipalities must also consider multiple sources of data and information on risk factors related to security and well-being. Once the respective city councils or municipal councils have adopted their plan, municipalities must implement their action items and then also encourage external agencies to implement their action items as well, as the plan can both consider delivery both internally from the municipality and by external agencies as well. And finally, municipalities have to develop an evaluation framework to ensure that the plan is meeting its goals and council goals. So on that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Lisa to present the other key elements and aspects of the plan. Over to you.
Thank you. The provincial planning framework provides certain key elements that informed our planning approach to develop the plan. So first, community safety well-being planning takes the social determinants of health approach. And this means that the plan considers all aspects of our lives, from employment to health, to culture, to education, and so on, and then focuses on those that are the key priorities to the community. And the plan must address key local priorities to reduce risk factors and address root causes of crime, social disorder, and ill health. And to do this, all sectors must be involved to ensure we collectively are addressing the issues to ensure the highest impact. As such, the plan does not focus on one organization's particular concerns, but rather focuses on key social priorities and working together towards shared goals and outcomes, as no one organization can address these root cause issues on their own. And the plan will be evidence informed and will not duplicate, but rather complement existing initiatives for community safety well-being, and will identify and address gaps in the system. Next slide, please. The provincial planning framework also states that we should consider 4 areas of focus when we develop the community safety well-being plan. So incident response is about immediate need and crisis intervention, represented by the red circle here on this image. Risk intervention is when there's something that's happened or there's a high risk that something will occur again, and that's represented by the orange circle. And prevention is that there's a chance that something could happen, but nothing has happened yet, and working to address the issue before something occurs. So that's represented by the blue circle. And social development is about root causes and improving those. So things like poverty, inequity in the system, and this is represented by the green circle. And the province acknowledged that incident response often gets a lot of attention, but the critical area for attention of a community safety well-being plan is on social development, which requires long-term investment to improve the social determinants of health and well-being, to address the root cause issues and move forward. And all of these require collaboration, information sharing, and performance measurement to ensure the objectives are being met and we're working together towards our common goals. Next slide, please. So now I would like to just give you an overview of our approach, which was informed by our advisory committee and approved by council in October 2019. And the approach outlined in this slide allows us a systematic way to develop the plan that can be defended later and does not just address one organization's particular concerns. And this also ensures that we adhere to the guiding principles which were shaped by the advisory committee and approved by council. And these principles included items such as being evidence informed and keeping our community central to our planning. So to date, we have completed the data analysis and environmental scan, which is represented by the first shaded bubble on this slide, including perception polling and program mapping. And now we are presenting the community safety well-being plan priorities to council for approval, which is represented by the second bubble on this slide, and they'll go to council on Wednesday. To develop the priorities, we conducted engagement activities to understand the needs of the community. Over 630 residents and stakeholders participated in our engagement activities from the beginning of March to the end of June 2020, representing diverse people across Ottawa. The equity and inclusion lens was applied, and special efforts were made to reach out to as many diverse audiences as possible. We do have a what we heard report, which includes the demographic information and the issues discussed within each topic. And this report is available on our website, and that website is listed on the last slide of this presentation. Public engagement is a fundamental element throughout the development of the plan. And as you can see from this graphic, there remains opportunities to participate in the process as we move into our next phase of development, which focuses on strategic objectives, strategies, and actions. Further, we would develop an evaluation plan and performance measures, an ongoing governance structure, implementation plans, including the financial framework to form the full community safety wellbeing plan. And although council approves the plan, any future actions and initiatives identified under it will be undertaken by the most appropriate department, service, partner, or agency. And this means that the City of Ottawa may have some of the actions, but will not assume full responsibility for the implementation of the plan. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, a key element to the success of a community safety wellbeing plan is taking a multi-sector approach to ensure different perspectives and knowledge are shared to gain greater understanding of the issues and provide more ideas for possible strategies and actions to address them. And the Ottawa Police Service is one of those partners and has been participating in the process from the very beginning. The chair of our advisory committee, the Crime Prevention Ottawa Board of Directors, is Councillor Diane Deans, and Chief Slowly is also a member of this advisory committee. We also established an interdepartmental working group to align our city services to discuss the development of the plan and to gather information and data. And Inspector Ken Bryden is the Ottawa Police Service representative on this working group. Community safety wellbeing staff also circulate all opportunities to police contacts to share with their various distribution lists. And we've presented to you various police staff at various levels on several occasions. And Ottawa Police Service staff provide data, information, and insights as to their experience, and which helps to inform our work. Next slide, please. So this slide here is a high-level overview of what we heard from our public and stakeholder consultations. As previously mentioned, the detailed what we heard report is available on our website. But this slide gives you an overview of how public and stakeholders rank the various topics when asked to prioritize them. And participants were also able to identify their own topics that they felt weren't covered in our list, and these are summarized in another category. The consultations revealed and acknowledged the interconnection between all of these topic areas. However, participants also recognized the need to address root cause issues. So just based on this slide, the top 5 priorities that public and stakeholders identified are housing, 2, discrimination, marginalization, and racism, 3, mental health, 4, systems change, security, and lastly, finally, number 5, financial security. Next slide, please. I'll take a moment to present the proposed priorities, which again go to council on Wednesday. And in no particular order, they are discrimination, marginalization, and racism. And we were told stories of discrimination and racism for participants in our consultations and calls to address systemic racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. The research, such as Ottawa Public Health's recent study on the African, Caribbean, and Black communities and mental health, demonstrate the inequities of the systems and effect on marginalized communities. The anti-racist, gender, Indigenous, and equity lenses must be considered in all our work as we develop the community safety wellbeing plan, but also require specific actions to move forward. And we'll continue to work with our many partners, including the Anti-Racism Secretariat, the Women and Gender Equity Strategy, the Indigenous community, and many, many others as we move forward on this priority. The next priority I'll talk about is financial security and poverty reduction. And poverty was identified as a critical barrier to well-being and safety in our consultations. And this priority in our consultations was also connected and linked with many other issues such as housing, mental well-being, discrimination, employment, and basic income. And in addition, the 10-year housing and homelessness plan needs assessment also identified the link between housing and poverty. Next, housing. Housing was identified as a top priority for consultation participants across all demographics. And the plan will encompass and recognize the important work underway in this area and look for opportunities to support and enhance this work. Next is mental well-being. This priority encompasses mental health, substance use issues, and social isolations, with the focus on the outcome of mental well-being. In discussion with Ottawa Public Health staff, including substance use with mental health was critical because of the comorbidity between the two. Also in our consultations, participants often mentioned mental health and substance use together. Furthermore, social isolation will be considered as part of mental well-being, as consultation participants identified a direct connection between social isolation and mental health. And social isolation in particular was raised as an issue both pre-COVID and during COVID. Gender-based violence and violence against women was added as a priority by the Community Safety Wellbeing, by the Community and Protective Services Committee on October 15th. And lastly, the one in the middle, integrated and simpler systems. This is more of a process priority and is seen as a priority both in and of itself, but also as an enabler of the other priorities, which is why it's been centrally placed in this graphic. This priority is about working together collaboratively to create a more streamlined system. This would include communications, processes, policies, finances, data, as well as service coordination and delivery. There was a call to action to change our culture as organizations and to focus on shared goals and how we can make it happen rather than focus on our own individual mandates. Next slide, please. This slide before you represents the next steps for the development of the plan and the associated timelines. As noted by Ms. Bietlow, staff expect that a final plan will be presented to Community and Protective Services Committee and Council for approval in late 2021. Please note that the timing on this slide is tentative due to COVID response and the deadline from the province. There will be a variety of engagement activities throughout the process, and the next upcoming public engagement activities will inform the development of objectives, strategies, and actions for each priority, and will begin in Q1 2021. We will also develop an evaluation plan, performance measures, an implementation plan for each priority, and determine leads and the resources required for actions, including human and financial. And all this will culminate in the final plan for approval by Community and Protective Services Committee and Council in late 2021. Next slide, please. And we've just included in here the contact information for the team and our website, so that if you'd like to stay informed as we move through the process or like to get in touch with us, you can. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa, Valerie, and Tony for being here tonight and for your presentation. I thought it was important that the board hear that presentation. Superintendent Granger has a question or a comment she'd like to ask.
Chair, maybe while Superintendent Granger is sorting out the technical things, if you don't mind, I just wanted to, on behalf of the police service, thank Tony, Lisa, Valerie, for not just the presentation tonight, more importantly, the body of work that's gone in to this effort to date. For me, it's one of the most exciting things I've seen in the development of policing in 30 years. It's legislation that stands alone in Canada, here in Ontario. And it's an opportunity for any municipality in Ontario, but I'm hoping the nation's capital, to play a leading role in designing and implementing a plan that meaningfully puts community safety and well-being into the hands of the city and its community, where the police are a contributor but not the leader. I think it's a vehicle around which we can have that type of coordinated, sustained, data-informed change that can ultimately speak to resource allocation, reallocation in a meaningful way. It will allow for integration and to address the underpinnings of crime as opposed to just crime, the social determinants of health. And you have my full commitment and the service's full commitment to support Tony and his team, the city, and their efforts more broadly to implement this plan.
And Chair, if I may add, while we're waiting for the question as well, Chief Stoley's leadership, he's been stalwart as supporting us. And we forgot to mention the presentation as we were going through this, and another example of police participating. He's assigned Deputy Chief Bell to a select steering committee that helps me as well, other than the formal work that includes Donna Gray, my colleague, in her department in social services, Dr. Etch's public health, and DC Bell in a steering committee where we can look at things more strategically and to ensure that we're not missing out on anything. We're ensuring that everybody's participating. So that's been also tremendous support as well too. So I needed to mention that, other than the formal structures that Ottawa Police has been participating, Chief Slowly has not hesitated to give us his help. So I appreciate that as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. And on the advisory board, the one omission that you had in that presentation was Councillor Ralston King is also on that board. So Superintendent Granger, are you there?
I apologize profusely. I don't even know how I raise my hand.
Oh,
I was shocked to hear you asking me to ask a question.
Okay, well, nice to see you. Anyone else? Any comments?
I do have a comment. I'd also like to thank Tony, Lisa, and the team, having participated on this process through Crime Prevention Ottawa. I'm appreciative of the tremendous work that has been done. I think that this is the right model. It really serves to break down existing silos and encourage multi-sectoral partnerships. And it really demonstrates that those are essential in developing strategies, programs, and services to minimize risk factors and to improve overall well-being for our communities. In a sense, it sounds like the approach that the police service is really suggesting for mental health. And obviously, this would be a coordination of services. So I just had two quick questions. I'm not sure who I'm posing them to. Maybe it's you, Chair, to the Chief, or to Tony. But we've been talking about this mental health strategy that is being proposed by the police service. Obviously, I'm assuming that this framework, this community safety and well-being framework, which really acknowledges that community safety and well-being cannot just be placed on the shoulders of the police, that this plan would be a central part of that strategy and framework as it goes forward. And maybe another attached question to that. So 3 questions is really ensuring if we're utilizing this process that we have increased engagement of community groups and residents. I know that was the goal of the community well-being plan ultimately. So I'd love to hear some comments around those 2 elements.
Sure, maybe I'll start, and then members of the team, Lisa and Nat, can talk a little bit more about the community engagement, because that's a key component. And our apologies, actually, Councillor Member King, you're effectively an important member of our Crime Prevention Ottawa advisory committee that Chair Deans chairs as well too. Chair Deans and I have had these comments. This seems like a very complex, to a certain extent, almost bureaucratic process, but I think what it does, it'll serve us well as a foundational piece. Directly to your question, exactly, that doesn't prevent us, the initiative that you as a board, and more importantly, the police service is doing on mental health, and other initiatives that we're doing, our community integration right now, and some of the other work that's being done in our public health or our social service group. It doesn't prevent that work. What this will do, it will be a foundational piece that'll be able to add on top of the work that's already being done. And I actually encourage that we can't wait for this broad piece of work to be done. If there's priorities that need to be addressed right now, and I think I heard the discussion today, and it belongs to you as a board and to police service to do it, but we're more than hopeful to be able to participate in the work that the DC Bell is going to be doing on the mental health strategy. And I think that needs to be done now, and this later on, it'll dovetail tremendously and right into that, because it's part of the work that's being done. So I think that it really works well, and we shouldn't wait when we have these one-off identified large priorities, but this will set the stage for that work, and it'll continue into the future. So I think it's something that's important, because that's something that Chair Deans has actually mentioned to me, that we're hearing from the community. It just seems like long, but to do this work well, to ensure we have data, to ensure we have what we need to have a foundational piece to rest on for the future. As we move forward, we have to do this and take the time to do it well, and address the needs of the community. So I think one doesn't go without the other, and I encourage us, if we identify things that we can get, not quick wins, because that's the wrong thing. These are important projects, but certain issues that need to be addressed now, let's do it while this work continues. I'd maybe ask Lisa or Valerie if they want to jump in a little bit on the community, the second part of the members' question there on the community integration.
Yeah, so on the community integration side, it has been a critical element in terms of doing that. We've worked very hard at trying to outreach and continue to, frankly, in terms of talking to a wide variety of different people to make sure that those voices are represented as we move forward going into the plan. So it is a critical element. And the one around specifically around integrating our services came through loud and clear, which is why we proposed the priority of the integrated and simpler system. We heard that loud and clear as being really critical to the success, not just around mental well-being, but frankly, across a lot of our services, and that real frustration about knowing where to go and how to get the information and why do I have to share my story multiple times, but also from our partners about and agencies and organizations working in the community about, we know that there's been work done in one area and why can't we share that information so that we're actually working together and working from some common tools. So we heard it about data, we heard it around funding proposals, and can we work jointly on those. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there that we're going to continue to build on as we go into the future.
Well, thank you for that. I know that coordination is the key. We're seeing that emerge as a trend with social services across the board at the city. And I think it's very important for us so that we can really maximize our response and also ensure, like I was asking about, a maximal community input. So the last quick question I had was, I noted that in terms of the province's vision for these plans are supposed to be a living document. Notwithstanding the fact that I know that we are in the middle of creating the plan, I'm just curious as to how the city will move forward with this as being a living document, one that should ideally be updated by communities as they move forward in their work. As example, we know, under legislative mandate, the homelessness plan goes on for 10 years and has updates. I know that this is really early days, but I was just curious, how does that also look in terms of the community well-being plan?
Madam Chair, to the member, it's actually a very good question. It is part of the strategic plan of council, and it'll remain there. So you will continue to have oversight, and you are right, this has to be a living document that's got to continually be updated and be reflective of what the community wants and needs as far as community safety well-being is, and we have to adapt accordingly. So it'll remain there with the other pieces that you've talked about. Actually, we're looking, and it is early days, but in an end state, we could see the housing and homelessness strategy fall under this, our 10-year housing plan. This can be an overarching plan that'll take into account all those plans. And that's why when Lisa did the presentation, mentioned that one of the key mandates we have is to ensure that we don't duplicate, but rather leverage what's already being done. So in the end state, perhaps, and again, early days, and we'll have to go back to council to ensure that this is what the wish, but this will be the foundational piece, and everything else will come in underneath it. So we've already started working with Donna Gray, for instance, and some of the work they're doing there, and the housing is one of them. It would be a key component underneath the community safety well-being plan. So I hope that gives you a bit of an understanding of where this may go, but you're very right, this is early days, but that's how we see this, to ensure that then you can keep your pulse on the community, and we can continue to adapt as we move forward.
Well, once again, thank you for the work that you've done on this plan. It's been intriguing to see the way that it's been evolving, and I'm looking forward to it to continue to evolve based on maximal community input. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor King. And I guess just one last word from me, and that is, of course, plans need to be funded. I agree with the strategies. I agree with the priorities that came from the community. I think those are all hugely important, but it will be up to this council and the province of Ontario, who mandated the plan, to make sure that those areas that we've identified are properly funded so that we can move them forward. Tony, Valerie, Lisa, thank you for coming out this evening and for making this presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing you again sometime soon when you come back with a further update. So thanks for your time tonight. Received on the report?
Received.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, moving then to item number 4, the 2021 budget directions and timetable. Chief, I'll just turn this over to you and your staff for the presentation. But before I do, I just want to note that the board will be hearing from public delegates on November 9th at the Finance and Audit Committee. And we'll be receiving the board will be considering the budget for approval at its November 23rd monthly meeting. And I've been anticipating that there may be a lot of interest in that budget meeting on the 23rd. So with that in mind, it's my intention to start the board meeting that day at 2 o'clock as opposed to 4 o'clock. So I hope everyone will put that on your calendar, and we will make that change on our website. So I and Councillor Meehan have a motion, but I'm going to turn the presentation over to you first, Chief.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll make sure I set an earlier alarm for that next meeting then. Thank you. A lot of this has actually been covered, so I'll try to move very quickly through this. You know, this is my first full budget. As you know, Chair, I arrived in office last year having had the budget build and design largely completed, and was putting the presentation for it, but not necessarily my stamp on the budget. And in the same case, you were exiting to a much more difficult road on your own. So it feels like we're coming back to the beginning again for you and I. And that's why I'm quite excited about presenting this early insight into the 2021 budget build and where we're going, and giving some indications to you and the board, to the city and the broader community as to the types of investments we're planning to make, not just next year, but over the remaining course of my tenure here, in order to achieve the board's priorities, the services expectations, and to move this organization forward. If you can go to the next slide, please. Sorry. We can go to the next slide. Okay, we'll work through the technical challenges that are going on here.
Sorry, Chief, wrong presentation. That's what happens when you don't pay for good help. Just give me a second.
Sure, no worries.
Stop share. Share screen.
The joys of Zoom platforms in the COVID world.
Why is that happening?
Yeah, it's jumped back and forth a couple of times, hasn't you, Jeff?
Okay, I'm gonna do something here. I'll try again. If it fails this time, then I might ask Krista to take control.
Now that you've revealed that it's not Krista in control, we now know the good help we're not paying for is at the CAO level. Is that?
Oh yeah, this is all on me, Chief.
All right.
I might ask Krista if you can take over and take control.
If we have it ready, we will take it over from this end.
All right, thank you. And I'll rescue the good CAO from his own self-condemnation. I think that my confidence in the 2020 budget was in large part the board's confidence in appointing Jeff Letourneau as our CAO, and where we're going next year within the envelope, but to expand our capabilities to meet board expectations, community expectations, is exactly why we've got such a great CAO. We just won't put him in charge of PowerPoints anymore.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And if we can go to the next slide, then we'll get caught up on things. This slide includes a lot of the information that we talked about over the previous several presentations, mine as well as the excellent presentation from Tony DeMonte and his team. We've heard the calls for change and we're looking for new approaches. We've talked extensively around the mental health piece, so I won't go into the first bullet point in terms of what the 2021 budget is going to bring forward, except to say we are at this point looking to commit significant amounts of resource dollars and FTEs to advance whatever the community design of the larger mental health response strategy that will be designed and implemented over the next several years, but particularly at the start of 2021. Again, in my presentation, we talked about training around advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion, a lot of discussion around de-escalation, anti-Black and Indigenous racism, and then more broadly, the mental health training for not just frontline officers, call takers, dispatchers, and quite frankly, right across the board. A lot of discussion on the neighborhood program. On this bullet point, I will say we're looking to commit substantial new resources, up to 20 officers into our expanded suburban neighborhood response teams. It's going to be a uniquely designed suburban response, different from what we have in the urban areas in the 6 neighborhoods year to date. Deputy Bell and his team have been working hard with their academic supports and community stakeholders, including counselors, to figure out what that model is going to look like. Very early days, and there's a lot more community consultation before we get there, and then we'll start to roll that out for a rural strategy. It will include 5 more crime prevention officers. One of the number one things we heard from counselors and community was the important role that the individual community police officers have played in that trust building role between police and community, and that very tactical day-to-day response to community concerns. So we're looking to staff up our neighborhood response model and staff up our community, crime prevention officers. I'm quite excited about an investment, and we had a very deep discussion at the command table. I want to credit Acting Deputy Joan McKenna, but all the command team for really pushing hard and making a major investment for our work in reducing violence against women, and in terms of the implementation of the spirit and the letter of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. 5 additional resources into our sex crimes unit and our partner assault unit. 2 of those resources specifically, one as a full-time coordinator for our VAW program, and one as a full-time coordinator for our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That's a big investment, but not nearly enough. But again, we're starting to put more and more of our scarce and most important resources to support our most vulnerable and marginalized and often racialized communities. Last but not least is investments into our own members and our member health and wellness programs. Again, additional full-time equivalent staff into that area with an additional $5 million in annual investment. We are committed to delivering real value through the budget. We're not asking for more money. We're going to realign our priorities with our most scarce resources. We're going to reinvest in our partnerships, as we've discussed, with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, the approach to designing a mental health strategy where we are a support to, not the lead of, such an effort. And we'll continue to provide material resources to advance the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan in Ottawa. If you can turn to the next slide. So this one's a relatively content-free graphic, but I'll put some meat on the bones here. There's been a lot of changes in the last decade, in the last half decade, even in the last year since I've arrived as Chief of Police. Demographic and technological societal trends. I mean, we've had discussions around this board table on body-worn cameras, on the use of artificial intelligence, facial recognition. We know technology is a driving factor across all aspects of society, not the least of which is the justice system and policing. And this board and the community that the board taps into has had a wide array of positive and negative responses to the application of technology, the advancements of demographic changes, and the larger societal trends, and we're very much alive to that. When it comes to trends in crime, disorder, and public safety, for me, one of the most disruptive elements has been on the health side of things. That falls into that disorder bucket. So we've talked extensively about the impacts of mental health and addictions, the opioid crisis on frontline policing, where our officers are being challenged even more to be not just crime fighters, but social order interveners and a wide array of health services that they are not tasked with, but not properly supported. And how do we right size that demand and get more people to the table and move us into different areas? But until then, we are literally out there on a 24/7, 365 basis across a massive piece of geography, responding for calls for service for people in crisis, administering naloxone kits in the middle of the night to save, at this point, over 70 lives in the city of Ottawa. We've talked about legislative changes in legal trends. In the last 5 years, we have decriminalized marijuana, and we're now starting to have a discussion around broader decriminalization in the country. We have seen new legislation here in Ontario, which is groundbreaking across North America around the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and we're still learning about that legislation, how it applies locally here, how do we actually plan, implement, and evaluate, fund, and resources on an ongoing basis. And while we've come a long way, there is still a huge amount of unknowns in that area that we have to continue to work on. In terms of scope expansion and budget pressures, again, a very healthy discussion around defund policing, the budget bill going into 2021, the implications of other efforts like this in North America and around the world. What can we learn from that, and what can we customize that in terms of a local level? And a huge amount of discussion, obviously, on community perceptions and expectations, particularly in 2020, which I think is a year that we all can't wait to see the end of. And we'll probably have a significant sigh of relief as the clock ticks over into 2021, all of which points to increasing cost, increasing complexity for policing. The job has never been more complexing and vexing for frontline officers, chiefs of police, board chairs, mayors and council, solicitor generals, and Public Safety Canada. None of us have the answers. Everybody has an opinion. There are lots of examples of good practice, but no example of best practice anywhere in the world. And all of that impacts on legitimacy and trust. That's the policing environment we're in. I know people inside and outside are looking for simple answers, simple investments, simple decisions to address all of these and many more problems that time doesn't permit me to express in this board meeting, but this is the reality. And I wish there was one single little thing we can do or one big bang decision that we could make to make everybody happy, and that's simply not the case. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to get away from the usual measures of police effectiveness. Crime is up, crime is down. Cops per population is an indication of relative cost of policing. Compliments and complaints against police. The number of people that we arrest, the number of charges that we lay, the amount of people that are in the jails, all of which are good indicators of the old model of a reactive enforcement-based approach to policing in most of the parts of the Western world. That's not where the community is at, and I don't think that's where the most progressive and effective police services are. I referenced some of those places like Police Scotland, which with the broader support of civil society have looked at a broader range of key performance indicators like the social determinants of health to really understand the underpinnings of crime and to get to solutions, meaningful and sustainable and scalable solutions that don't put people in jail, but that put them in more healthy and resilient positions to have a more productive life, that don't put communities under more surveillance and more over-policing and underserving, but allow police to be a partner in and with community to address those underpinnings. And yes, when there is an issue that can't be addressed in any other way other than a criminal justice response, they do that with an approach that is primarily driven around a restorative mode, where the least amount of people go into the prison system and the justice system through pre and post-charge diversions, where people who do go in come out as quickly as possible under a rehabilitation, reconciliation, and restoration approach. So these are some of the examples on the screen of the social determinants of health and the types of outputs and outcomes that we would look to see coming out from, for instance, a well-designed, implemented, and evaluated community safety and well-being plan. This screen was developed a long time ago, even before I arrived here in Ottawa. It was developed by the Wellesley Institute, Dr. Kwame McKenzie, one of the leading experts in Canada, and I suggest in the world around the social determinants of health. And he said, as much as crime activities by individuals determines the policing demand, so too does nutrition, education, housing, employment, yes, safety, but family, resources, transportation. And you'll see many of these topics were actually outlined in the presentation by Tony DeMonte that talked about what our own community has said that they believe are the important areas, the priority areas for community safety and well-being. Access to housing, access to transportation, nutrition that comes from an anti-poverty approach. So these are well established in the parts of society and the parts of the world that have already made more progressive investments and assessments around community safety and well-being. We talked about the escalating calls for service that police are largely asked to take care of. 6,000 calls per year for mental health requests, which is a 20% increase in the last 5 years alone. We need to get ourselves out of that cycle, and the police cannot continue to be the primary responder for these calls. And as I said earlier on, we're working to reduce significantly the amount of times that we go to these calls for service. So these are just some of the examples of the new key performance indicators, shared outcomes that through a process like community safety and well-being, we can right-size the demand model, move more and more resources, more and more of that demand towards other civil society entities, whether they be city agencies or not-for-profit sector or community volunteers, and allow the police to play a more legitimate role where their expertise can produce better outcomes, but in an integrated approach, and one that's going to take place over years. I recall Councillor Menard saying that the CAHOOTS model started in 1989. 20 years later, they're seeing the types of outcomes. This will not happen overnight. It will not happen in one budget cycle, and it will not happen even during my tenure as Chief of Police, but it must start now, and we must make those investments. Next slide. So last but not least, we've talked about a lot of very, very new and innovative changes within the Ottawa Police Service across the city of Ottawa. But the core policing still has to go on. While we're redesigning the plane that we're flying in, it actually has to keep flying. We need to continue on with our core mandated and legislative responsibilities in policing, assisting in prosecutions, preventing crime, enforcing the laws, supporting victims of all sorts of things, public order and emergency response, supporting the prosecutions of criminal cases that go before the courts. We need to continue to improve on our road safety, addressing violent crime, and addressing calls for service. I remind people that when COVID started to really hit the streets of Ottawa, it actually hit hardest on the streets of Ottawa. Transportation and traffic-related violations were and remain our #1 public safety issues outside of the health issues that are directly associated to COVID. And again, full credit to our frontline officers, particularly our traffic officers, who've really worked hard with our community partners to address the traffic issues. And we have to do this core policing, not just in the downtown core, but across the urban core, the suburban core, the green belt, and the rural parts of Canada's largest municipality. This is a massive strain on police resources. It's a massive strain on community resources. It's a massive strain on the community itself. I had several members of the community and counselors who talked about the need for additional mental health and addiction supports for young people in particular, but for those in the suburban and rural areas, they talked about the lack of access to those services, which are mostly clustered in the downtown area, and makes it almost impossible for someone who does not have access to mass transportation and or a vehicle in order to get down to those services in the downtown core. So these are issues that are well beyond the policing aspect that need a whole of city approach to design, and we still need to be able to deliver our core policing services, our mandated core services across a city that actually could fit Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, and Edmonton. Hugely challenging circumstances for the Ottawa Police Services. We're up for the challenge. We've got great members, we've got a great board, we've got great community partners, and we have a great city. With that, I'm going to turn things over now to Jeff to do a deeper dive into the actual budget build process for 2021.
Thank you, Chief. Next slide, please. As the Chief mentioned, we are tabling our budget on November 4th. We're going to touch on a few high-level items in this budget, but remember, more details will be available on November 4th. So the 2021 budget directions were received from Council and are as follows: that the Ottawa Police Services levy be increased by 3%, and request the Police Services Board develop the 2021 draft operating and capital budgets based on this tax increase. That the assessment growth taxation revenues generated from new properties be estimated at 1.5%, and request that the Police Services Board develop their 2021 draft operating and capital budgets within this allocation. The annual impact of this proposed tax increase represents a $19 increase to the average urban property, which will bring the average police tax bill to $644 for the average urban homeowner. Next slide, please. So as the chief has mentioned, the 2021 draft budget has been developed based on the calls for change and new approaches while advancing the board's strategic priorities. And the chief has touched on a few of these items already, but I wanted to highlight the following key priorities that will be included in the draft budget that presented on November 4th. Neighborhood policing. There'll be an investment of 20 growth officers to create suburban neighborhood response teams, expanding on the investments made over the past 2 years. 5 growth officers to increase the number of community police officers. The development of a youth strategy, including a review of the school resource officer program. From a mental health perspective, there's been a lot of talk on this already this evening. I won't go into a lot of detail, but the draft budget includes a $1.5 million investment for the co-development of a mental health response strategy with community partners. From a sworn officer recruiting perspective, significant changes and improvements have been made to the sworn recruiting process over the past few years. This has resulted in a 400% increase in the number of applicants and a significant increase in the quality, diversity, competence, and skill set of those applicants. So far in 2020, the OPS has hired 79 new recruits. 26 or 33% of those are women. 28 or 35% of those are racialized, and 2 or 3% are Indigenous. These recruits are highly educated, speak multiple languages, and have employment and volunteer experience in youth services, community housing, mental health services, and victim services. Sworn recruiting in 2021 will continue to build off these improvements and the highly competent and diverse applicant pool. Violence against women. The 2021 budget will include 5 growth officers to increase the number of investigators and create a dedicated violence against women liaison coordinator. There will also be an increased focus on vulnerable women, including Indigenous and racialized. Next slide, please. The budget includes investments in training and development, including anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism and intercultural competency training. Additional investments in de-escalation training, specifically focused on mental health calls, including an efficacy review. From an EDI perspective, continue to implement the Edi Action Plan, continued investments in EDI leadership coaching, along with development of an intercultural development inventory, along with the previously announced third-party intake and investigations being led by Ruben Tomlinson into sexual violence and harassment. From a reorganization and modernization perspective, a major reorganization was executed today at the service, impacting 60% of the organization. This has been communicated previously to the board and to the service. This reorganization was implemented today. The reorganization has been under development for the last 12 months and will better enable the service to deliver on its strategic priorities and execute the changes and priorities identified in the draft budget. Key highlights include a greater focus and alignment on neighborhood policing and supporting the city's community safety and well-being plan to better address underlying causes of crime and social disorder, and an overhaul to the intelligence-led policing model to include the ability to focus as much on reducing social disorder and improving traffic safety as we do on crime management. Member health and wellness. The budget includes 4 new FTEs reallocated from the base budget to support member wellness, bringing the annual wellness budget up to $5 million. Continued investment and support of the OPA developed fatigue management strategy. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about financial accountability. And over the years, OPS has implemented sound and prudent financial management practices, which have resulted in significant savings. Between 2012 and 2020, OPS has generated over 17 million in annualized operating budget efficiencies. This represents 5% of the draft 2021 operating budget. The 2021 draft operating budget will include additional efficiencies over and above these numbers presented here on this slide. Next slide, please. The OPS management is here to support the board, and part of that support is ensuring that the board has accurate and factual information. Over the past few weeks, there have been reports and discussions in other forums that highlighted the OPS budget has been growing faster than the city or certain city departments over the last number of years. This slide highlights a few key facts. The OPS annual budgets have adhered to City Council and the Police Services Board directions. The OPS operating budget has not been growing faster than the city. In fact, the OPS budget as a total percent of the city budget has decreased from 9.9% in 2016 to 9.5% in 2018 and remained flat up to and including 2021. It's also important to note that the OPS budget includes capital formation costs to pay for buildings, fleet, and information technology capital investments. This needs to be factored in when comparing OPS to individual city departments. As an example, when the 2021 police tax rate increase is broken down, it is 2.4% for operating costs and 0.6% for capital formation. The 2.4% would be a more appropriate comparison to individual city departments. Next slide, please. Now this slide benchmarks the OPS with its top 12 peers across the country and top 12 cities across the country. The slide shows the following two key performance indicators: population per police member and percentage of municipal budget allocated for police services. At 9.5%, the OPS budget allocation is amongst the lowest in Canada, especially when compared to other regions containing rural, urban, and suburban geography: Peel, York, Durham, and Halton, as you can see at the bottom of the page. The population per police member is also amongst the lowest in Canada and has been steadily eroding as population growth in Ottawa has been outpacing OPS growth. In 2011, the OPS ratio was 479 and has steadily eroded to 549 in 2018. Overall, these metrics do show that OPS is an efficient police service dedicated to serving the City of Ottawa.
Jeff, if I could just interrupt you there for a second, and Chair and Board, in addition to those trend lines that I think are really important, I've spoken before on the population to police ratio, and it's a good indicator, but not on its own a real strong indicator of efficiency. The CAO has coupled another data point, which is the percentage of budget allocated. Those 2 points alone should be a clear indication of not just the efficiency, but we're getting close to the deficiency of funding and resourcing for a city and region, quite frankly, the size of Ottawa. Ottawa calls itself a city, but it is truly a region. It can fit 5 of Canada's largest major cities in its jurisdiction. So that box we've drawn around the regions of Peel, Waterloo, York, Durham, and Halton. Although Ottawa calls itself a city, it's actually better defined as a region. And when I benchmark our finances and our operations, I don't do it against Toronto or Vancouver or Edmonton or Montreal. I do it against Peel, Waterloo, York, Durham, and Halton, because we're truly a regional sized municipality, not a city sized municipality. We have an urban center, a suburban ring, a greenbelt ring, and a rural ring. It is a massive jurisdiction that has to have policing on a 24/7, 365 basis. So when you look at the police to population, when you look at the actual percentage of allocated police resources, and you look at the size of geography that we have to police on a 24/365 basis, there should be a lot of confidence in our ability to manage within the envelope, deliver services that do not that in fact are more progressive and more aligned to legislation and community expectations, and not going back to the well seeking more and more and more money. I think that's a clear indication of the quality of leadership that existed long before I arrived here, and certainly over my first 2 budgets in place as Chief of Police. Jeff, back to you.
Thank you, Chief. Next slide, please. Now this brings me to the last slide, which is the budget timetable. November 4th, OPS will table the draft 2021 operating and capital budgets with the board and city council. November 9th, the OPS board, finance and audit committee will meet and hear public delegations on the 2021 draft budget. November 23rd, OPS board, this is an OPS board regular meeting for consideration and approval of the 2021 budget. And finally, December 6th, City Council review and adoption of the 2021 budget. And now that brings me to the end of the presentation. Reminder, we do have a tabling on November 4th where there will be significantly more detail presented and provided to the board. But I'll pause there and would be happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief Slowly and Mr. Letourneau. We do have one question from Member Smallwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you. That was a really great presentation. And I must say, on a high level, that's exactly where we as a board have wanted to be going. And so I'm delighted to see this. This is the right direction. And I believe this is responsive to all of the issues that have been raised, not just in the last year, but over several years. And one of the reasons why we looked at moving in the direction that we as a board chose to go. I had 2 small comments that I hope you'll take into account, because I know we're going to be going into this in depth at our budget meeting. But one is just with respect to the training. I think it's really critical, and it's wonderful to see the increased focus on training. And but one of the things that I think I would like to see when you make the next presentation, when you come to us, is an explanation or a description of who actually provides the training. As an example, with de-escalation training, I think it's important if we want to get the right outcomes. For instance, are the people providing the training, is their main function to provide use of force training and they're doing this as a sideline, or what is their background and what are their skill set? Because that, I think, can make a big difference in terms of the efficiency and the effective outcome of that training. The other issue, and I've raised this before, and I know that we love to, and this keeps getting thrown at us, this population for police member, also known as the cop per pop. And I really find it not helpful to get that, because I remember, I think it was attributed to Mark Twain, his 3 kinds of lies with respect to statistics. And I think that we can cherry pick all sorts of statistics to prove a point. And I could do that by saying Ottawa has the lowest cop per pop, but Ottawa also has one of the lowest crime severity indexes in Canada. Edmonton, on the other hand, has one of the highest cop per pops, but it also has one of the highest crime severity indexes. So if I wanted to twist and abuse statistics, I could simply say, it would seem, based on picking that statistic out, that fewer police means less severe crime. And of course, I'm not suggesting that, but I think that's the problem with using statistics like that, is that when we just pick a couple of them out, there's a very complex, and I think, Chief, you've made this point repeatedly, this is a complex issue, a complex problem, and simple statistics like that and pulling them out sometimes gets picked up by the press and others as, oh, gee, we don't have enough police, therefore we must immediately hire more police. And I think from a board perspective, that's not the discussion and not where we need to be going. The discussion we need to be having is, what does the community need? What do we need to provide in terms of providing community safety and well-being? So on that note, I just thank you very much for that presentation. I think it was excellent.
Thank you, Member Smallwood. Chief Slowly.
Yeah, Chair, Vice Chair, thank you. 2 important points. On your first point in regards to training, the bullet point that was on slide 6 referred to an efficacy review. What we meant there was that we were going to review the effectiveness of the overall approach to training, from development to implementation and evaluation. We would be in that efficacy review looking to bring in community and academics to help us in the design, implementation, delivery of training and evaluation. We'd be looking to get away from the model of 2 sworn officers at the front of the room delivering a wide variety of training, for instance, de-escalation, anti-racism training, and have a co-facilitation model or a community facilitation model where there was no police officers at the front. And we've had some success with that to date. So yes, we're going to take a different approach to not just what we're training, but how we're designing the training, who's doing the training, who's evaluating the training going forward. I completely agree with your points on cop to pop statistics. That's why we added an additional statistic this year, but that's also why I spent 2 full slides at the beginning of my portion of the presentation on the complex world of policing that we're currently in, as well as the range of additional key performance indicators, measures, and statistics that we need to bring in, like the social determinants of health, that really will bring to life the community safety and well-being plan, and not just the usual suspects of crime up, crime down, crime severity index, cop for pop. That doesn't give the true picture of the demands on a police service. It doesn't give the true picture of the relative effectiveness and cost effectiveness of the police service, and truly won't give a true measure of success of a community safety and well-being plan once it gets fully designed and implemented. So totally agree with all of your points.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to thank the chief for that. And I really hope that I don't read in the media tomorrow about how our cop to pop ratio is way out of whack. Thanks very much.
You can't blame me for that one, though.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions from board members, I'm going to introduce my motion, seconded by Councillor Meehan, and then just speak to it briefly. And this is a new budget direction. Whereas volunteers play an important and vital role in the delivery of community services throughout the City of Ottawa, and whereas we have heard concerns of the cost of background checks from community agencies who describe it as a barrier to new volunteers, and whereas the current pandemic has created financial strains in the community, be it resolved that the Ottawa Police Service waive the current fees for all volunteer background check applications for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, and be it further resolved that these fees be reinstated once the City of Ottawa enters into phase 3 of Ontario's action plan to reopening. The reason I brought this forward is I've heard from many residents in the community that they've always had a problem with background checks, and we have certainly dealt with this in the past and the cost to the organizations. But right now, in the midst of a pandemic, they clearly are in urgent need of volunteers, and this is becoming a barrier. And so I think that it's very imperative during a pandemic that we find a way to address this issue and to waive those fees for the organizations that are serving some of our most vulnerable citizens. So does anyone else want to speak on that, or can we carry that direction? Carrie?
Thank you. Chair Deans, I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing and a very timely motion. And in fact, there was a lot of debate when you were on leave of medical leave of absence, and this was discussed at length. And there were a few issues. Maybe Jeff can highlight on this. There was some budget constraint, but anyway, given the pandemic thing, I will fully support it. But with this, there is another issue which I have brought on, and it was reported in Ottawa Citizen only 2 weeks ago, where the reconstruction was done as a part of the investigation, and about $2,600 some dollars was being asked for the providing of the photocopy to the victim's family. And when I raised this question, whether the discretion can be used or not, it was told that it is solely within the board's perspective. So my request is, or my suggestion as an alternative is, that during this pandemic, not only this volunteer background fees, but if any fees like this reconstruction report or something is done, that should be also considered to be waived. Or If it cannot be waived as a general rule, maybe on a discretionary, on a case-to-case basis, should be considered.
Okay, so I think we're going to take my motion as a standalone, and then maybe offline, Member Nerman, you could ask Mr. Letourneau to take a look at the specifics of those and see if there's a way to incorporate it into the budget that he brings back to the board. Is that satisfactory?
So do I have to bring another motion, or how it would be considered? Because the OPS will be asking for the board direction for that.
Yeah, I don't know the details of it. I think that was a collision reconstruction report, wasn't it? And I don't know if that is doable or not. So maybe you could just give a direction to Mr. Letourneau to take a look at that and report back when he brings the budget.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Member Sueda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I definitely agree with the motion you put forward, seconded by Councillor Mien. I just have a question. Maybe Jeff can answer this. Is how much does the OPS receive from background checks?
From background checks in total, we receive the budget is $4.4 million in revenue annually.
Solely from background checks?
Yes.
Now, can that number get broken down into types of background checks?
Yes, it can. I don't have that information with me. That's something that we can get into in the tabling. What I would say is the majority of that is related to employment. The volunteer background checks are about 10% of that total.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Member Sueda. Anyone else on this motion? So carried on that motion? Okay. And we'll accept the direction that Member Nerman is giving for Mr. Letourneau to take a look at the issue that he raised. And then can we carry the overall budget directions, which are the 3% and the 1.5 growth? Carried? Carried, thank you. Okay, moving on then to item number 8. Was the next held item, the complaints report, part 5, Police Services Act, and I think it was Member Smith.
Yes, I noticed in the report that it mentioned there had been a substantial increase in the complaints, over a 30% increase in the complaints. And I wasn't unsure if I understood the reason that was given for this quite notable increase. It seemed that there was, it was related to the red light cameras and public conduct. And with respect to red light cameras, I wondered, is this, because it's such a sudden increase, is this people having a dispute about the fact that they went through, or they're upset with the fact that they went through a red light and got a ticket? Or is it that they're saying that the cameras suddenly have stopped working and they're getting tickets for lights they didn't go through? And the other one, you mentioned that public conduct, and there's a comment about improve or correct officer driving skills. So once again, I'm just wondering why this would be a sudden year-over-year increase like that in officers' driving skills or red light camera operations. Is there a comment on that?
Vice Chair Smallwood, I want to see if Inspector Hugh O'Toole is on to provide a deeper dive into those two areas.
Good evening, Chief. I am on the call. As this is my first day as the new inspector in PSS, Rob Drummond is on this call with me. Perhaps Rob might be able to assist me with this.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Chief and Member Smallwood. So you're referring to the third page, Member Smallwood?
Yes, I can. I can read you what it says. It says discussion, new complaints. Complaints about policy and service conduct are received from members of the public through the Office of the Independent OIPRD may also be initiated internally by Chief's complaints. By the end of the third quarter of 2020, a total of 143 complaints, chiefs and publics, were received, representing an increase of 32% when compared to the same time period in 2019, 108. By the end of the third quarter of 2020, a total of 82 public complaints, conduct, service, and policy were received, representing an increase of 34% when compared to the same period in 2019, 61. This increase appears to relate to both red light camera infractions and public conduct complaints. The professional standards section continues to monitor this change and identify issues which may have an impact on this increase. Where appropriate, BSS identifies and directs officers for training in an effort to improve and/or correct officer driving skills.
Okay. So that's on page 2. Did you see the explanation on page 3 that it breaks down why so many of the complaints are actually screened out by OIRPD?
Well, I saw that. I see that the number of complaints that have been screened out. What I'm wondering is why, those got screened out. Why did they, what drove them to come in the first place? That's what I don't understand. Why would there be a sudden year over year dramatic increase in the number of complaints?
We're seeing an increase in these types of complaints that are being screened out. We've been seeing a steady trend over the last year where we're getting more and more complaints that are being screened out. If you look at the numbers, they're a lot higher than the year before.
Right.
Do you see that information?
Do you know what's driving the increase in complaints?
I don't have an exact reason why the public seems to be doing that, but OIRPD is seeing an increase of these more what they're referring to as frivolous or vexatious, or they're outside the 6-month limitation, or it's not in the best interest of the public to investigate them. It's an ongoing issue. We receive a lot of complaints that involve what I would categorize as people with mental health issues who will complain to the police, the mayor's office, all kinds of other government entities, all at the same time. We see that as a regular thing in our world where that comes in normally like that. I can't say why we seem to have an increase like that, but we seem to have a lot of these complaints that are not deemed, that the OIRPD deems to screen them out. And we've seen a steady increase in the last year or two on that front.
Okay, and not just steady, but actually a dramatic increase.
Yes.
Also, you do mention specifically you're identifying, directing officers for training in an effort to improve and/or correct officer driving skills.
Yes.
Is
So
this something?
we do have the red light camera tickets for internally for members has increased some, and we are continuing. Like when we deal with those, we send the officers for training. Those who have their repeat offenders.
Okay, so that explains it. So it's actually our officers driving through red lights.
Yes, we do. Okay. We do send our officers if there's an issue. Like if it's a first time offense, where there's a counseling process. If it's a second time offense, we go through or second or third, we have a driver training period for them.
Terrific. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Is there any other questions, Member Smallwood, on that?
No, that's excellent. I really appreciate that, and we'll certainly keep an eye on if this trend keeps going up the way it has. Thanks very much.
Okay, and just so you know, we're not alone with this trend where other services are also seeing the number of complaints increasing, but they're getting screened out. It's not just an Ottawa phenomenon.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Smallwood. Received on report number 8?
Received.
Okay, report number 9, I think also that was you, Member Smallwood.
Yes, I do apologize for dragging these things out. That wasn't the response I hoped to get in the inquiry I had put in. I was hoping that I would hear that the that the idea of police cruisers blocking sidewalks or bicycle lanes was something that was completely frowned upon. But I see in the response that it mentions that it's an acceptable reason for blocking either a bike lane or a sidewalk would be a call for service. And of course, I think we know there are massive numbers of calls for service. I think that the idea of blocking a sidewalk and or a bike lane should be absolutely a last resort. When that happens, and I've certainly seen examples where somebody in a wheelchair or a walker is forced out into the roadway into ongoing traffic in order to get around a vehicle that's blocking a sidewalk. It seems to me that there usually is the opportunity that instead of blocking either the bike lane or the sidewalk, a police vehicle could block a lane of traffic. If operational requirements are such that something has to be blocked, I would hope that it would be the roadway that would be blocked, not the bike lane or the sidewalk. I think it's important because the public often sees couriers as certainly hopefully less frequently now, but Canada Post and others blocking sidewalks and bike lanes because they're only going in for a minute, and the driving causing a bicyclist to go out into the lane of traffic doesn't bother them that much because they don't even see it while they're in delivering or whatever. But I think the police should be setting an example. And I think particularly when I know that we're often looking at ways of generating public goodwill. And I note in your response, you specifically mentioned that it is well known and understood that this practice of a police cruiser blocking the sidewalk or bike lane is something that generates negative public reactions. So it would seem to me that this is an opportunity it's kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of something that we can do. And I would hope that we would be able to, and I guess my question is there any reason why we can't have a policy, something along the lines of police vehicles shall not be parked so as to block pedestrian or cyclist infrastructure, which forces vulnerable users out into potentially harmful situations? We should always be ensuring safe passage for vulnerable users is provided at all times. Is there some reason why we can't do that? And of course, I think everybody understands that if there's an exceptional circumstance, then all bets are off. But in a normal course of duty, I hope it would only be in an exceptional circumstance that this would happen.
Vice Chair, thank you. A lot to unpack there. Let me just first of all explicitly and even more emphatically state it is not acceptable for us to block or illegally park unless there are exceptional circumstances. What I would like to unpack further with some patience on your part and the board's part is maybe a little bit more nuanced isn't the right word, but a little bit more careful assessment of what we can lay down as more firm guidelines. There's parking on sidewalks, parking in bike lanes, parking in lanes of traffic. I'm not an expert enough on traffic management and traffic safety to say how we should prioritize the best of those bad options. So I'd like some indulgence to take that away and come back to the board with a better framework around how we can express that and do that and then actually carry that out more consistently. But in principle, we agree with what you're saying. The least most intrusive and the most safe way for us to use those exceptions should be what we're aiming at and better articulating and better enforcing going forward.
Okay, I think then that's a reasonable direction to the staff to go away and consider how you might better reflect the concern and come back with a report. Okay?
That's certainly acceptable to me. Thank you very much.
Super great. So received on the report?
Received.
Thank you. Okay, then turning to item number 15, which is the motion on reconciliation. It's moved by myself and seconded by Member Johnson. I'll just read it out. Whereas in June of 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its findings and 94 calls to action to advance the reconciliation process in Canada. And whereas the calls to action were directed at all levels of government, the private sector, and all Canadians. And whereas in June of 2019, the final report from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry was released and built on the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service have a responsibility to build strong relationships with our community and integrate best practices into our everyday work. And whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service recognize that there is a need for reconciliation with the OPS and between the OPS and the broader community. And whereas the Ottawa Police Service through the Edi Action Plan has done a considerable amount of work and continues to acknowledge and address racism in its many forms, including anti-Indigenous racism. The Ottawa Police Service, a member of the City of Ottawa Aboriginal Working Committee, has ongoing commitments to the City Reconciliation Action Plan. It contains 14 actions that speak directly to the truth and reconciliation calls to action. So therefore, be it resolved that the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service commit themselves to continuing to support and advance reconciliation both internally and externally. And be it further resolved that the Policy and Governance Committee commit to engaging with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition and other potential Indigenous groups or individuals and work to identify calls of action within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that apply to both the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service, and report back to the board with an action plan that will implement these findings. I want to start by thanking Chief Slowly for his cooperation of this motion, and Mark Miracle and the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition for their help and support in the drafting of this motion. The calls for action that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are integral to our society moving forward in a healthy and positive way. We recognize that all citizens in Canada have a role to play, but we are especially cognizant of the role that we can play as an Ottawa Police Services Board and the Ottawa Police Service. I believe that this work, especially now, is extremely important, and I look forward to having a more fulsome discussion when P&G brings back their report. Is there anyone that wants to add anything, or can we carry that motion? The motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And then the next motion, just going to get the executive director to put it up on this screen. We have heard concerns about the use of force during interactions with the Ottawa Police Service. And as a board, we recognize the work that needs to be done in this regard. This board has a responsibility to our members, and we must make sure that the chief has current policies from which to work. And I very much recognize that we can't direct the service, but it is our duty and responsibility as board members to create a policy framework. And we have a responsibility to the public and need to ensure that they have confidence and trust in the police service. In response to those concerns, and in addition to the work already being done by the service, I believe this board needs to look at our current policies and determine if they are fulsome enough. That's why I hope the board will support this motion that is moved by myself and seconded by Member Smallwood. Whereas the Ottawa Police Service is in the process of doing an internal review of the use of dynamic entries, also known as no-knock warrants. And whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board is responsible under the Police Services Act for establishing policies for the effective management of the police service. And whereas the board has heard community concerns around the use of dynamic entries by the Ottawa Police Service, and whereas the board has a duty to represent community interests in carrying out its responsibilities, and whereas the board wishes to ensure it is providing the necessary guidance to the Chief of Police with respect to the board's general expectations around de-escalation, use of force, and non-force options, and or other tactical deployment strategies in relation to ensuring community safety. Therefore, be it resolved that the board direct the Policy and Governance Committee to review, update and potentially create board policies applicable to de-escalation, use of force and non-force options, and or other tactical deployment strategies, including but not limited to dynamic entries, recognizing that the policy shall not direct the chief of police with respect to specific operational decisions or with respect to the day-to-day operation of the police service, but may set out a context or framework within which the police operations can take place. So this is really asking the P&G committee to take a look at this whole issue and to make sure that to look at our current policies and make sure that they believe they're fulsome enough to address the concerns that we have heard expressed by the community. And if they're not, to bring back a range of suggested policy amendments or new options for policies that can be considered at a future meeting by the full board. Is there any, oh, there's two hands raised. Member Sueda?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Is this a new motion that that just came in today?
This is a motion that it's a process motion. So we're not going to be discussing the content of it. We're asking the policy committee to do a review of it. It comes out of work that Member Smallwood and I were doing with the chief this week, and we realized that perhaps it's time that we ask the policy committee to look at our policies. So we're not debating the substance today, Member Sueda. We're asking the Policy and Governance Committee to review our policies and to come back with some recommendations to this board.
Okay, thanks for the clarity, Chair.
You're welcome. And Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair. A very useful very useful motion, and in fact, very timely. I remember Vice Chair Smallwood and myself have raised few issues concerning these tactical entries in the past. Now, this motion, once it, and I'm just trying to understand the dynamics. We will be, as a Policy and Governance Committee, we'll be working on various parameters. And this motion has the policy from the policing side and the community side, which have to be elaborated. Now, will there be an option for the public consultation, even though the motion says that we have taken the feedback, but quite possible, I don't know how current they are and how useful they are given the policing point of view or a community point of view. Will there be a window of opportunity for the public consultation going forward on this motion and making it as a policy?
The members of the public are welcome to come out and present their concerns to the Policy and Governance Committee at the board meeting when it's on the agenda. So we will advertise that. And if members of the public want to weigh in on where they feel that we should be looking at changes, I mean, I think it will be important for the Policy and Governance Committee to gather our current policies in one document so we can see what we have today. And then I think it would be absolutely appropriate for the Policy and Governance Committee to hear public delegations on where they think we should be reforming our policies.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else? Is that item carried? Carried. Thank you. Okay, is there any other business? Okay, so we need a motion, maybe Member Smallwood, a motion that the Ottawa Police Services Board adjourn the public portion of the meeting to move in camera to discuss confidential items pertaining to legal, labor relations, and personnel matters in accordance with Section 35(4)B of the Police Services Act.
I would so move.
Thank you. And Member Nerman seconds.
I second it. Yeah.
Thank you. And all in favor? Carried.
Carried.
Okay, that ends the public portion, and we'll just take a 5-minute recess and then we'll start the in-camera session. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice night.